Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burton and Charlie Stayt.
Our headlines today. Gun salutes will take place across the UK to mark the death of the Duke of Edinburgh at the age of 99.
Details about the Duke's funeral are due to be released later as the royal family mourns the loss of a beloved husband and father.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
The man and his legacy. This morning on Breakfast, we'll speak to personal friends of the Duke and those whose lives he touched.
The sporting world has been paying its own tributes to the Duke. There was a minute's silence before last night's Premier League match at Fulham, where the players wore black armbands. And that was the case for the jockeys, trainers, officials at Aintree, where there will be further tributes paid ahead of the Grand National, which does still go ahead today.
Good morning, it's Saturday the 10th of April. The Armed Forces will lead a second day of tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, who died yesterday, aged 99, with gun salutes across the UK, in Gibraltar and from warships at sea.
Details of his funeral are also expected to be announced later. Prince Philip was the longest-serving royal consort in British history and was a constant support to the Queen during more than 70 years of marriage.
In a special programme on Breakfast this morning, we will be looking back on his life with some of those who knew the Duke well, the people whose lives were touched by his charitable endeavours and public duties, and we'll discuss how his legacy will live on.
First, though, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has this report.
Windsor Castle, where the Duke spent much of the past year in isolation with the Queen, where he died yesterday morning, and where it's expected his funeral will take place in St George's Chapel in about a week from now. Further details of the arrangements are expected to be given by Buckingham Palace later today. The Duke's death will be a grievous loss for the Queen after their 73 years of marriage. Last night on a BBC programme, their eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
It was in August 2017 on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that the Duke carried out his final solo engagement, inspecting a parade by the Royal Marines. It was pouring with rain, yet the Duke, who was then 96, was not to be deterred. Duty came first that day, as it had for so many decades, so often alongside the Queen, but also pursuing his own public programme, to which he brought his own famously forthright style. But the public image of the Duke walking a few paces behind his wife only tells part of the story. His greatest contribution was the unseen support he gave to the Queen as she coped with the often solitary role of head of state. Occasionally, she alluded to it. "He is my constant strength and guide," she said during the Diamond Jubilee. He was the one person she could always turn to. Just before his 90th birthday, the Duke had said in a BBC interview that he felt it was time to wind down.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say.
Yet it wasn't until 6 years later and that parade in the pouring rain on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that there was any real evidence that he was retiring. Now the Queen must continue without him. The world will pay its tributes to a man of strong personality who made a significant contribution to the nation's life. And his family will mourn a much-loved father, grandfather, great-grandfather and husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now outside Windsor Castle by our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell, and from Buckingham Palace, our reporter Sangeeta Maisker. But first, Sarah, Windsor is really going to be the centre of activity in the coming days. What are the plans? What do we know so far?
Well, yes, indeed. Good morning to you. The Royal Standard is flying above Windsor Castle, which of course means the Queen is here. The castle, of course, the place where she and Prince Philip really spent the final months of his life. They were shielding here during lockdown, and people have been commenting on the fact that perhaps actually they managed to spend more time together alone in his final few months than otherwise would have done. And it's hoped that that's some comfort to the Queen as she contemplates looking forward now after losing her life partner, her partner of 73 years of marriage. As far too many people who've lost loved ones over the last year will know, decisions have to be made about the funeral arrangements, and the Queen is approving those at the moment. The details are expected to be released later today. Plans have been in place for years as to how to mark the passing of such an important public figure, but the pandemic has required changes to those plans. It's been made very clear that any event which might draw a crowd is to be avoided, and COVID restrictions will be observed at all time. There will be no lying in state. There will be no state funeral. As I say, exact details later, and also later today at midday there will be a death gun salute. 41 rounds, that's one every minute for 40 minutes, will be fired in cities across the UK, in Gibraltar and on various ships at sea. Now, gun salutes are a traditional way to mark a significant royal event, but will be particularly poignant today, bearing in mind Prince Philip's very strong association with the armed forces. Just a couple of other points. The government and the royal family are requesting that people don't gather at royal residences. We saw that yesterday, people very keen to come together and share their thoughts about Prince Philip. They're also asking that maybe a donation to charity be given rather than lay flowers. And there is a book of condolence that's now live on the royal website, and people are being asked to leave their messages of thanks, perhaps, to the Duke for his 7 decades of service, and of course messages of support for the Queen.
Sarah Campbell, thank you.
Well, let's go to Buckingham Palace now. Sangeeta Maiska is there for us this morning. Sangeeta, I'm mindful of what Sarah was saying just a moment ago about the official advice, the rules that exist, of course, around travel, around social distancing. And that is what people are being advised. But nonetheless, I know that many flowers have been laid where you are. Tell us a little more.
That's right. We saw a steady stream of people arrive here yesterday, Charlie, throughout the day, laying flowers, laying wreaths. Most of those have now been removed overnight, and I think that's part of what you're saying. The palace, very conscious that we are still in the middle of a pandemic and wanting to nod to people not to turn up here in large numbers. What does, however, remain are some of the many messages that were tied to the palace gates, and they are really very touching. Most of them nodding towards Prince Philip's time as a Royal Navy officer, and also the years, the 73 years he spent by the Queen's side in public service. Let me read a couple of them to you. Thank you, Prince Philip, for your wonderful years and service to our beloved Queen. Family, nation and Commonwealth, you have left a legacy of helping to make the world a better place. Another one, fair winds and following seas. That, of course, that phrase often used by sailors. Nevertheless, people have been arriving throughout the night, including this family who wanted to come and leave flowers for the Prince.
We're all quite cut up about it, really. I mean, I know he'd been sick for a while, but when it actually happens, it's different, isn't it? So yeah, it was a sad moment, and obviously we talked as a family and decided we wanted to come down and you know, visit and pay our respects and lay some flowers for him.
If you take a look over my shoulder, you will, of course, see the flag now flying at half-mast, and you can probably also make out the balcony upon which Prince Philip stood by the Queen for so many years through celebrations and commemorations. I certainly have been here on many occasions seeing the royal family waving. That was part of our national life, our national picture. I think today, Charlie, people's thoughts will be moving towards the Queen as she now comes to terms with being a widow.
Sangeeta, for the moment, thank you very much.
The most senior officer in the Royal Navy has also paid tribute to Prince Philip. The Duke of Edinburgh was himself a veteran, having been one of the youngest first lieutenants in the Royal Navy. First Sea Lord and Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, says the Duke will be deeply missed.
His generous spirit, his delight in all aspects of the naval service, and his deep understanding of our values, standards and ethos made him such a close friend to the service for over 8 decades. And he will really be deeply missed by all of us.
Time now is 10 minutes past 6. It is Saturday morning, and let's have a look for you at some of the front pages of the newspapers this morning. And of course, there is one theme very much front and centre. Daily Telegraph, we'll start with, has an image of Prince Philip in his military uniform for its front page. Philip joined the Royal Navy in 1939, went on to become one of the youngest first lieutenants. His naval career ended when his father-in-law, King George VI, died.
Goodbye, my beloved is the Daily Mirror's headline, with a photo of the Duke alongside the Queen. They were married, as you know, for more than 70 years.
Let's have a look at the Daily Mail, featuring a similar headline on its front page, calling it the Queen's heartbreaking tribute to her husband.
And deep sorrow reads the headline on the front page of the Daily Express. The paper describes the Duke as indomitable. And we'll take a look inside the pages as well. And this is, we heard some amazing details about the life of Prince Philip yesterday, but this is one that passed me by. I think this comes from The Sun. We know about his fairly difficult early years and life as a refugee, as he described it, but he was actually born on a kitchen table in Corfu. And there's a picture of him as a young lad, aged 5, before fleeing revolution from there as a baby in a fruit box. But they just remind you, his mother, his lineage, if you like, was a great-great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So he certainly had ties to the British royal family.
Yeah, and I think in many ways, what a lot of people will be learning today, and I've certainly been on a learning curve, especially about those early years. You know, there's been so much information out there, and many of the papers doing this. This is actually from the Sun newspaper, and this is just plotting through some of these images. And one of the things that I'm very mindful of, and this would clearly be appropriate for anyone of his era, 99 years old, is the change in the way things were. Was brought up as a child, and how the world has changed around him. And I thought a lot of people have alluded to this in terms of what he's had to adapt to over the years. And just some of the imagery here gives you a very real sense of how much things have changed over the years.
Well, you see that as well in these picture tributes, and I have to say, I mean, there is an awful lot in the papers this morning, but this one, how he shook the world, and the incredible work rate of the Duke of Edinburgh and the Queen, particularly in those first 2 decades of their marriage, travelling around the world and meeting foreign leaders, and pictured there with Nelson Mandela in Cape Town in the year 2000. But he became very adept, didn't he, at dealing with those public situations.
And I think one of the things we're very much going to try and reflect this morning is, of course, a lot of people's thoughts immediately turning to the Queen. And I think there are quite a few of these images. This picture was actually taken, this is in Hampshire. This was on their diamond wedding anniversary. So that was 2007. And a lot of people are saying, and we're going to talk to a number of his friends, as well as those who knew him through service, but some of his friends. And I think one of the things that is emerging, those who knew the couple well, was how much he made the Queen laugh. And I think that everyone's probably heard a few anecdotes by now. Hopefully we'll hear some more of those this morning. And I think in some of these pictures, there's a real sense of understanding about the relationship between the two of them, which is something which is so...
After all these years, that they still had that ability. And there's something, isn't there, about a good marriage can last if you can make each other laugh a bit. And just, I like this one. There are lots of pull-out sections today, but this from the Times is the front page of their pull-out. But actually, you need to turn it round to get the full picture, because you can see he's playing polo on a bike, and you can just about see he's knocking the ball there in the corner. Maybe I should show you the whole picture there. There he is. And he was a great sportsman, you know. He loved the outdoors, as we know. We've heard in all the tributes as well.
So we'll have a lot of time for reflections this morning, but aware that it's 6:14 and Thomas has got the weather for us this morning.
And it's 17 minutes past 6. Now, Prince Philip had a particularly close association with Scotland, dating back to his school days in the 1930s.
He and the Queen have enjoyed holidays with family in Balmoral every autumn for many decades. Glenn Campbell has the report.
At Holyrood Palace, the lion rampant is lowered, as the city that has long shared its name with the Duke of Edinburgh takes in the news, posted on the palace gates, that His Royal Highness has died, 2 months short of his 100th birthday.
I do feel incredibly sad. I think it would be a great loss, and he was a real character.
The Prince has been around for 99 years and has been at the Queen's side the entire time. So it's a huge loss to the country, especially given his long service.
In Ballater on Royal Deeside, some remember a prince they met in person.
We're walking in Ballacabooey Forest and this black Range Rover came up and the Duke got out and was fixing something at the side of the road. He must have been 94.
A character that we can all identify with. Yeah, sad. And I feel so sorry for the dear Queen.
From his school days to big national moments like the opening of the Scottish Parliament, the Duke of Edinburgh's association with Scotland was lifelong. The royal couple were regular attenders of the Highland Games when they summered at Balmoral.
I think Prince Philip loved Aberdeenshire because of the peace and quiet, and indeed the outdoors. A man who was an accomplished sportsman. He loved attending the Braemar Gathering, the Ballater Games. I think he loved the competitive nature of Highland Games.
In Glasgow, more memories and reflections.
Absolutely gutted. I honestly thought that he was going to get to the 100. I think a lot of people actually wished that he was going to get to that 100, and gutted for the Queen.
I did the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, and that is something very positive he's gave to the community.
And from Inverness,
you kind of felt that it was coming, but it was still a bit of a shock at the same time when you heard about it.
Yeah, it was just like a shame you didn't make it to like 100. Like it was so close to like his 100th, and he was like a pillar of like the royal family and like quite an icon.
More tributes will be paid at Holyrood on Monday when Parliament is recalled to remember a remarkable prince. Glenn Campbell, Edinburgh.
Right, time for some sport now. And the world of sport is, of course, acknowledging the death of Duke of Edinburgh today in various different ways, Mike.
Yes, well, the Duke always had a great passion and a lot of skill at various sports. I remember the early 90s covering the sailing at Cowes Week on the Isle of Wight and seeing how brilliant he was on the seas, the high seas, didn't mind getting wet, really threw himself into it. And then we know of his love for carriage driving as well. He was former president of the FA, Marylebone Cricket Club, and also an honorary member of the Jockey Club. And, of course, they'll be marking respects, as we'll report in a moment, today at the Grand National, ahead of the Grand National. Yeah, right across the sporting world, tributes have been paid to the Duke. Flags were flown at half-mast at a number of venues, including Wembley and all 9 county cricket grounds. Players wore black armbands, and there was a minute's silence as well at the Premier League match last night between Fulham and Wolves. And that will be the case across all professional matches in England and Scotland this weekend. There was also a period of silence ahead of England women's match against France last night. Prince Philip was president of the Football Association in the 1950s. And across football today, players, coaches and match officials will be wearing black armbands. So yes, the Grand National does go ahead at Aintree at just after 5 o'clock today. There'll be a 2-minute silence there, while jockeys will also be invited to wear black armbands, and flags will be flown at half-mast at the racecourse. Yesterday, there was a 2-minute silence before the first race of the day, as jockeys, trainers, officials all united in this mark of respect. So the Duke of Edinburgh's sporting activities really provided him with a welcome opportunity to get away from more formal royal duties. For him, sport became an outlet for his restless energy. And Prince Philip also proved himself to be a keen and talented competitor in a number of different sports. Our correspondent Andy Swiss looks back at the Duke's sporting life.
Prince Philip always enjoyed sport and he often excelled at it. At school, he learned to love sailing, and as a wedding present, he and the Queen were given a Dragon-class yacht, Blue Bottle. His main sailing companion was the socialite Uffa Fox, who became a lifelong friend. The two of them acquired something of a playboy image, although it didn't detract from their sailing prowess. Uffa Fox once said of his sailing mate, "I've never known anyone to take a boat across the tide as skillfully as he does." Prince Philip would take part in the Royal Regatta at Cowes for the next 50 years.
People in our modern kind of technological era, it really doesn't matter to them whether it rains or it blows or it's wet or it's cold. You just get indoors, or you. The thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
And now a change of bowling from the pavilion end.
As an enthusiastic cricketer, he also drew praise from high places.
And that one moved across the leg. He has a perfect action for a right-hand off-spin bowler.
Prince Philip would often play so others could benefit. He was a firm believer in recreation for all and raised huge amounts of money over the years for the Playing Fields Association. But it was on the polo field that the Duke was to grab most of the limelight, becoming one of the top 4 players in Britain in the mid-1960s, even though he'd started relatively late in the sport. He also made it more popular. The Duke's presence on the field put polo into the gossip columns.
He attracted spectators to come and watch, and they were rarely coming to watch him, not the polo, but of course they then, or some of them, got interested in polo and made a habit of watching it.
He had to stop playing polo when he was 50 because of arthritis in his hands. But he'd noticed another equestrian sport far more popular in countries like Germany and Hungary, which he threw himself into.
Go on, you stupid hole! Get on!
Carriage driving became his new passion. He was even responsible for drawing up the rules and worked tirelessly to raise the profile of the sport, as well as competing in the British team.
Great Britain was represented by George Bowman.
His fellow teammate George Bowman was one of the more unlikely friendships the Prince made in his sporting life.
I was a scrap merchant. And of course, he was a prince. And they made, at times people made a lot about this. But he never treated me any different. He always looked at me like an equal. And that was one of the things I really admired about him.
Despite some hair-raising spills along the way, such as here when his carriage hit a concrete block, the Duke carried on driving well into old age. In Greek, the name Philip means lover of horses, and the way he handled his animals was a measure of both the man and his sportsmanship.
Some really wonderful pictures and memories there. And it wasn't just his own sports, but of course, through the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, I've seen at first hand how he's inspired millions of youngsters to try a new sport, get involved in a new sport, because that is part of the award scheme. It's
because you've been there giving out the
awards.
Yeah,
I've been lucky enough to go along, give my time just to try and help present the awards to some of the gold winners. My own daughter, she got involved in sport for the first time through the Bronze Award, I think she tried Zumba, which you could basically pick whatever sport you wanted to.
Yeah.
So it did help people get more active and get involved in something new that they wouldn't normally have had access to, and that was the great thing. I know you're going to talk more about the Duke of Edinburgh scheme a little later.
Yeah, we are, and we're going to talk to someone in Australia, actually, because it was a global scheme, obviously right throughout the Commonwealth. But if you, this morning, have any sort of reflections of your own, maybe you met the Duke in passing, we'd love to hear from you at BBC Breakfast to get in touch with us. Perhaps you or a child, grandchild has been involved in the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme as well. Let us know the impact that had on their lives and how it inspired them. That would be good to hear.
It's the time now, 6:27. So leaders from around the world, both past and present, have been paying heartfelt tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, praising his life of duty and devotion to the Queen.
And those offering their condolences, including the King and Queen of Spain, the US President Joe Biden, who said that the Duke's legacy, will live on through all the charitable endeavours he shaped. James Reynolds reports.
Right from the start of the Queen's reign, Prince Philip was 2 steps behind and sometimes even out of shot. The model clearly worked. The royal couple went on to repeat it in more than 250 foreign trips. There were frequent visits to Canada, where the Queen remains head of state.
Prince Philip was a man of service, motivated by a sense of duty to others. I know that through the Duke of Edinburgh's award, he helped empower millions of young people from all backgrounds, including here in Canada, to realize their greatest potential.
The Duke was remembered in Australia, a country he visited more than 20 times.
Above all, he was a man who was steadfast, who could be relied upon, always standing by his Queen.
The Duke met a number of American presidents. In 2016, at the age of 94, he insisted on driving the Obamas from the helipad to Windsor Castle, making a small piece of history as the oldest ever presidential chauffeur.
He was a heck of a guy. He, it was his lifetime of service to the United Kingdom and the whole Commonwealth was visible to everybody for a long, long time. I think he's going to be missed, particularly in the United Kingdom. But 99 years old, he never slowed down at all, and which I admire the devil out of.
Prince Philip, here with King Felipe of Spain, was related to many of the royal families of Europe. His was a death in the family. Dear Aunt Lilibet, wrote Spain's King and Queen, we are deeply saddened to hear about the passing away of dear Uncle Philip. This is how the news broke in South Africa. The continent is home to Commonwealth and former Commonwealth states.
Our heart is being saddened by the death of the prince. But the old man has lived, but it's a great loss. But we just wish the family, our condolences, that they may be comforted.
It is sad, yes, because we've lost a life. But then looking at the age he was, I guess it's a celebratory thing. We need to celebrate the prince's life and no need for crying.
President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe wrote, "My deepest condolences to the people of the United Kingdom and the royal family on the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip. May his soul rest in eternal peace." But it's the islanders of Tanna in the southwest Pacific who may feel the deepest loss of all. Some worship Prince Philip as the reincarnation of an ancient warrior. James Reynolds, BBC News.
And it's 6:30. Thank you for being with us here on BBC Breakfast this morning. Now, described by the Queen as her strength and stay, the Duke of Edinburgh was the supportive figure by her side for over 70 years.
From his distinguished naval career to the many charities he championed and his dedication as the longest-serving royal consort in British history, our royal correspondent Nicholas Richard looks back on Prince Philip's remarkable life.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At the Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die.
And so, rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip. I, Philip. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. To my wedded wife. To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now? 18th.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
Believe it.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memory is going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. The last sight of him was last month, leaving hospital in London after a month-long stay. He'd undergone treatment for an unspecified heart condition, and he looked frail. While he'd been in hospital, the Queen had had to deal with the aftermath of the Sussexes' US television interview without her husband at her side. His two eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
Princess Anne spoke of the support he'd given to the Queen.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. That's part of, that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
reflections on the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. And we'll continue with those this morning. And thank you for getting in touch as well with your own experiences and encounters with him at BBC Breakfast for any more of those.
Saturday morning, 6:43.
Now, last November, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh celebrated 73 years of marriage.
And over the years, they've both reflected on their unique partnership, which was one of the enduring devotions and support.
The fact of the matter is that a marriage involves two partners. When there's lots to do, time seems to fly. And it appears to us, at least, that we've been fairly busy over the last 50 years. And the time has, of course, flashed past. Until, that is, you start looking back and try to recall what things were like 50 years ago. And you begin to realize how much has changed. In the autumn of 1947, we got married. Everyone seemed to think that our wedding was a very happy occasion and brought a little colour back to life after the dreary war years. We certainly thought so. We were then fortunate to enjoy 5 happy years of fairly conventional married life, and that included 2 years with a home of our own in Malta while I was in the Navy. Of course, this period came to an abrupt end when the Queen had the melancholy duty of succeeding her father after his premature death in 1952. She was 25 and I was 30, and we had 2 small children. And life, as you can imagine, changed dramatically in many ways, but it had much less effect on our married life than I anticipated. And then, after an interval of 10 hectic years, we had 2 more children and were more or less settled into our new way of life. And like all families, we went through the full range of pleasures and tribulations of bringing up children. Much can be done by an individual, but I'm sufficiently old-fashioned to believe that a great deal more can be achieved by a partnership in marriage.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner.
The main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim or we shall ever know.
Now, in 1991, on the occasion of his 70th birthday, the Duke of Edinburgh gave an interview to the BBC's John Humphreys. It was a chance for Prince Philip to look back over his life and reflect on many of his experiences.
You must remember that I was 17 in 1930, whenever it was. 9, and that was, or 38, I suppose it was. Then the war was threatening, and I didn't have anything else to, in mind particularly, and it was quite obvious that everybody was going to get involved. So it was apparent to me that the best thing that I could do was to join one of the services anyway, if I could. And at that time, I was virtually stateless, I think. I had a Danish passport, but the Navy said that they'd accept me. And so I went into the Navy, I think certainly at the instigation of my uncle, Lord Mountbatten. But I think probably if left to my own devices, I probably would have joined the Air Force, I think. But then I wouldn't have been here now.
Why?
Well, do you know anybody who joined the Air Force in 1939 and still alive today?
That's assuming that...
Very few, I can tell you.
You're assuming perhaps you'd have been a fighter pilot, is that right?
Well, either pilot, any sort of pilot had a jolly difficult time. Statistically, it was quite impossible for any bomber crew to do a full tour of 20 sorties.
Moving back from the Air Force, which you never did join, to the Navy, which you did, there's a model here of the ship you commanded, the Magpie.
Mm.
What about that period, being in command of a ship?
But it didn't last very long. I only had her for a year because I then had to... Well, it all got rather difficult. If you remember, the late King was not very well, and it was decided that the Queen that we should go to Canada in 1951, so I had to come back for that. And then the King was going to go to Australia, and he couldn't, so we were sent off on that. And then, of course, he died, so that was the end of the sort of naval career.
I think I've read a comment from you to the effect that the one what if that you regret is that you weren't able to continue a career in the Navy.
Well, it'd be very unnatural if you're in a career and doing reasonably well, not to regret completing it, or at least continuing with it.
Didn't Lord Lewin once say that if you'd stayed on in the Navy, you'd have become First Sea Lord?
Oh, what if? I mean, I don't know. Who can tell?
But it was a regret. You regretted it at the time.
Well, I mean, I think it's only natural. I'm not saying that my heart's pining for the thought, but I mean, just seen in the abstract, it would have been nice to go on. Yes.
Can I ask you about some of your other charitable work? First of all, the Sail Training Association. Now, why that? Why your close involvement with that?
Well, because I had the experience of doing some sailing and being sent to sea, as it were, in effectively a sail training ship, but while I was at school. And it seemed to me that it was a marvellous experience. It's the sort of thing that you don't get in the ordinary course of events. You're people in our modern kind of technological era, it really doesn't matter to them whether it rains or it blows or it's wet or it's cold. You just get indoors, or you... the thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
Is that what you enjoy yourself about sailing?
Well, that's rather different. I think that now it comes to competitive sailing is rather a different exercise. But no, I don't enjoy the physical discomfort of it. And that's why I don't go in for ocean racing or anything, that sort of offshore racing. In fact, the great thing about most of these occasions is that it feels marvellous when you finish, not while you're actually doing it. The idea really was to sort of complement the ordinary academic education. The idea was to encourage people to take part in those sort of things which adults eventually find worthwhile doing outside their work. I mean, a hobby, a sport, an expedition, some voluntary service. That was really the point. And the idea was to give them the experience by exposing them to the possibilities, to give them the experience so that eventually they could choose, you know, from their experience, what to do later on in life.
Was it a challenge? Was it intended to be a challenge?
I think it was a sort of do-it-yourself growing up kit. It was an extension of, as I say, of the education system. It is in fact achievable by most people, in fact by practically everybody, because the thing is adjusted to the capability of the individual. So challenge in a sense, but not entirely, no.
I wonder perhaps whether it came from the sort of Kurt Hahn philosophy, whether it was all about self-reliance, about personal achievement.
Yes, it had a lot to do with Hahn. I mean, in the sense that he stimulated the whole idea, but I think it then got developed by the group that eventually put the scheme together as it stands today.
But you regard Kurt Hahn in a sense as the sort of...
Oh yes, he was the inspirer of it, by all means, but in the same way that he was the inspirer of Outward Bound, the inspirer of what's now become the United World Colleges. It was his basic idea, but I think that he was very much an ideas man. I mean, he had a philosophy about the young, but I think that it needed an intermediary of some sort who would convert what was a good idea into a kind of practical scheme.
A difficult question in the space of the amount of time we have, but how would you encapsulate the Hahn philosophy?
Well, I think it was that he felt that the education of the young should go beyond purely academic education, that they needed to have their horizons extended, and they needed to be made to feel responsible and self-reliant, I suppose, as you were saying.
Is the philosophy behind it rewarding somebody for having done something, or trying to inspire somebody to do something?
I suppose in the end it's to encourage them to do something and to give them some recognition for having done it, yes.
Some people have been critical of the scheme because they would say, you talk about encouraging people to do things, they would say that those people who do the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme are the sort of people probably who would do it without any encouragement anyway.
Well, I don't think that's quite true, because I suppose you could say that about almost anything. It depends very much on the adults concerned. If I don't think young people will flock to a scheme of this kind on their own necessarily. A lot of them do. A lot of them start it up entirely independently, and they just go along to an open award centre and they say, I'd like to start it. But the majority require, in a sense, the encouragement of some adult who's associated with them in some way, just to get them started and to explain to them what it's all about and what they have to do. And where there are these I think, remarkable individual adults, they get a tremendous response. But it is the adult that will encourage the young to take part.
Are you concerned at all that it's seen by some people as a bit of a middle-class thing?
It depends on your perception. I mean, I think if you want to say it's a middle-class thing, I mean, you're going to say it. There are a great many open award centres that take people from every section of life in every part of the country, in both rural and city and urban.
Do you detect that young people, and I know this is a terrible generalisation that I'm asking you either to agree with or disagree with, but young people are more or less alienated now?
I think if you had asked Pericles or something, he would have given you exactly the same answer about young people as anybody does today. I mean, people go through a state of mind while they're growing up, which in some cases alienates them, in other cases it inspires them, in other cases it turns them off, in some cases it turns them on. I think every older generation is going to be critical of the younger generation at some stage. I mean, simply because you're older, that's all, and you look at things differently. But I think, broadly speaking, young people have been young people ever since young people have been young people, I think. I don't think there are a great many governments, and there are not all that many people, who see the need for the conservation of nature for itself. It's nearly all for some other purpose or for some reason, or they see it as meaning the welfare of animals, for instance, or cruelty to animals, or not cruelty to animals. They find it difficult to see the difference between how you treat animals and the survival of species as a whole. They very often, if you have people who want to have protected areas, they think of them as national parks which are going to be available there for them to enjoy, no matter what effect they have on the natural inhabitants. It's a much more complicated business than simply talking about having a tree not cut down, or the treatment of an animal in the zoo, or something of that sort.
There are some absolutely fundamental issues, though, aren't there, such as the greenhouse effect? After all, if we destroy the atmosphere, we destroy everything.
No, we destroy ourselves. That's the point. The most damaging things that we're doing to the environment are going to eventually, if we go on with them, are going to destroy the human population. You can't destroy nature. It'll win in the end. It always has done.
Whose fault is it?
Ours. People's.
But who among us in particular?
Everybody, I think.
But you don't believe that we've actually got to look again at the way we live our sophisticated lives now?
What is evident, it seems to me, is that the world cannot go on supporting a population of 5,000 million people rising at whatever it is, 2% per annum. I mean, at some stage, the poor old thing is going to just say, enough. What I'm trying to do, in a small way, is to try and prevent the extinction of wild species, in the hope that at some stage they might have a space to exist on this planet, or to continue to exist on this planet. Because if somebody doesn't look after them, I mean, they really will disappear. An awful lot have disappeared. And the rate at which extinctions are taking place goes up every year.
Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burton and Charlie Stayt.
Our headlines today. Gun salutes will take place across the UK to mark the death of the Duke of Edinburgh at the age of 99.
Details about the Duke's funeral are due to be released later as the royal family mourns the loss of a beloved husband and father.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
The man and his legacy. This morning on Breakfast, we'll speak to personal friends of the Duke and those whose lives he touched.
The sporting world has been paying its own tributes to the Duke. There was a minute's silence before last night's Premier League game at Fulham, where the players wore black armbands. And that was the case for the jockeys, trainers and officials at Aintree, where there'll be further tributes paid today ahead of the Grand National, which does go ahead.
Good morning, it's Saturday the 10th of April. The Armed Forces will lead a second day of tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, who died yesterday, aged 99, with gun salutes across the UK, in Gibraltar and from warships at sea.
Details of his funeral are also expected to be announced later. Prince Philip was a constant support to the Queen during more than 70 years of marriage.
In a special programme on Breakfast this morning, we'll be looking back on his life with some of those who knew the Duke well, the people whose lives were touched by his charitable endeavours and public duties, and we'll discuss how his legacy will live on.
First, though, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has this report.
Windsor Castle, where the Duke spent much of the past year in isolation with the Queen, where he died yesterday morning, and where it's expected his funeral will take place in St George's Chapel in about a week from now. Further details of the arrangements are expected to be given by Buckingham Palace later today. The Duke's death will be a grievous loss for the Queen after their 73 years of marriage. Last night on a BBC programme, their eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
It was in August 2017 on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that the Duke carried out his final solo engagement, inspecting a parade by the Royal Marines. It was pouring with rain, yet the Duke, who was then 96, was not to be deterred. Duty came first that day, as it had for so many decades, so often alongside the Queen, but also pursuing his own public programme, to which he brought his own famously forthright style. But the public image of the Duke walking a few paces behind his wife only tells part of the story. His greatest contribution was the unseen support he gave to the Queen as she coped with the often solitary role of head of state. Occasionally, she alluded to it. "He is my constant strength and guide," she said during the Diamond Jubilee. He was the one person she could always turn to. Just before his 90th birthday, the Duke had said in a BBC interview that he felt it was time to wind down.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say.
Yet it wasn't until 6 years later and that parade in the pouring rain on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that there was any real evidence that he was retiring. Now the Queen must continue without him. The world will pay its tributes to a man of strong personality who made a significant contribution to the nation's life. And his family will mourn a much-loved father, grandfather, great-grandfather and husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
So we're joined now outside Windsor Castle by our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell and from Buckingham Palace by our reporter Sangeeta Maiska. Let's go first to Sarah. Sarah, very good morning to you. Just give us a sense as people absorb the news and look ahead a little for us into the days ahead and what we know about any plans.
Well, indeed, Charlie. Union flags, of course, flying at half-mast across government buildings across the UK. But here at Windsor Castle, the Royal Standard is flying as normal. Of course, that signifies that the Queen is here in residence, as she has been for the past year. The Queen and Prince Philip were shielding during lockdown here at Windsor Castle, spending many, many hours together, not having to go out on engagements and perform royal duties. So hopefully that will be some comfort to the Queen as she looks forward now, as you say, to life without her husband of 73 years. And there are so many people that have lost loved ones over the last year, and they will know that immediately you need to start thinking about the funeral arrangements, and that is what has been happening over the last day or so. And as soon as those plans have been approved by the Queen, those plans will be made public. I think what we can say with certainty is that whilst a funeral plan has been in place for many years, of course, Prince Philip's such an important public figure, it will have to be adapted and amended to take into account the pandemic with COVID restrictions, because it has been made very clear that no event which might encourage people to come out to mourn together will go ahead. So anything like a funeral procession which might have been planned will now not happen. But as I say, we are expecting further detail about exactly what's going to happen over the coming days to be brought forward, to be publicly announced later today. Also happening today at midday, there will be the death gun salute. This will be 41 rounds will be fired. That's one every minute for 40 minutes will be fired in cities across the UK and Gibraltar and at ships at sea. Now, these, of course, traditional at significant royal events, but particularly poignant, I think, when you think how strong Prince Philip's association was with the armed forces. So, as I say, that is happening at midday today. And just to reiterate, the guidance, the advice from government and indeed from the royal family is this: please to observe the rules of the pandemic. Please don't gather at royal residences. People also being asked to think about give a charitable donation rather than flowers. And there is an online book of condolence that has now been opened on the royal website, where people can leave messages, perhaps messages of thanks to the Duke and messages of support for the Queen.
Sarah, thank you.
Well, floral tributes have also been laid throughout the night at the gates of Buckingham Palace. Sangeeta Maiska is there for us. Sangeeta, inevitably it's become a bit of a focal point for tributes, despite the advice to people not to travel there, not to leave flowers. But just give us an idea of what's happening there today and what it's been like in the last 24 hours.
Well, that's right, Rachel, and I think with that at the forefront of their minds, the Palace has ensured that the floral tributes that were left, through that steady stream of people arriving yesterday with flowers and with wreaths, those flowers have now been taken away. But what has remained are some of the very touching messages that have literally been tied to the gates of Buckingham Palace. Let me just read a couple of them to you. One says, "To our unsung hero, Prince Philip, 65 years of service, 73 years of marriage to our beloved Queen. Thank you and rest in peace." Another one reads, "Fair winds and following seas." That, of course, a nod to his time as a naval officer. That's a phrase used by sailors, really to say good luck on your next journey. As you say, nevertheless, a few people did arrive through the course of the night. This is one family who came here, and this is why.
We're all quite cut up about it, really. I mean, I know he'd been sick for a while, but when it actually happens, it's different, isn't it? So yeah, it was a sad moment, and obviously we talked as a family and decided we wanted to come down and you know, visit and pay our respects and lay some flowers for him.
That sentiment that you heard there, very much the mood of the nation, I think. If you take a look over my shoulder, you can see that the Union flag is now flying at half-mast. And you'll also be able to make out that balcony where we saw Prince Philip side by side with the Queen over the many years, where Buckingham Palace has become a centre of celebration and commemoration. And I do think that as the course of the weekend, as we move over from Saturday to Sunday, people will be keeping the Queen at the forefront of their minds, because today she woke up a widow.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta.
Edinburgh Castle will be one of the landmarks across the UK that will hold a 41-gun salute to honour Prince Philip later today.
The Duke had a long and close association with Scotland, beginning with his years at Gordonston School.
Let's get a little more now from our Scotland correspondent, Alexandra Mackenzie. Very good morning to Alexandra. So, Edinburgh will be one of the places across the UK which is holding formal moments to mark Prince Philip's passing.
Yes, that's right. I'm here at Holyrood Palace, which is the official residence of the royal family when they're here in Scotland. It's at the end of the Royal Mile. At the opposite end is Edinburgh Castle. Now, normally you may expect people to be coming to lay tributes here at the gate, but people have been asked to pay tribute in another way and not to gather here at the Palace of Holyrood. The flag here has been lowered, and we're also just a few steps from the Scottish Parliament, and the flags there have also been lowered, and the tributes and condolences have been led by the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. She expressed her deepest sympathy on behalf of herself and also on behalf of the people of Scotland to Her Majesty the Queen and to the rest of the royal family. And she went on to say that the Duke of Edinburgh had a deep and long-standing ties with Scotland. Now, Scotland is in the middle of an election campaign, but all of that has been set aside for now, and Parliament is due to be recalled on Monday so that politicians can pay their respects. You also mentioned Gordonston there. Yes, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, did have a long-standing relationship with Scotland. He was one of the first pupils at Gordonston in Murray when it opened in the 1930s, and we're told that he excelled there, particularly in sport. He became head boy. He was head or captain of cricket and hockey, and tributes were paid to him also from Gordonston. Lisa Kerr, the principal there, said the Gordonston community joined together to convey their condolences. She said he was supportive of pupils fulfilling not only academic potential there, but also developing life skills. And she said that they were immensely grateful over the years for his presence and support to school life there, and said that he will be sorely missed. And he continued visiting Gordonston. He was there just a few years ago for its 80th anniversary, and the principal said that instead of during lunchtime being seated and being served, instead he wanted to mingle with the pupils there. So he's well remembered, and lots of tributes being paid to him here across Scotland.
Alexandra, thanks very much.
Well, political parties across the UK have suspended their campaigning for elections on the 6th of May following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yes, what we know is that MPs will also return to Parliament a day early. It's on Monday following the Easter recess.
We're joined now by our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who is in Downing Street. Helen, just give us an idea then of the process of politics over the next few days.
Yes, well, the flags here in Downing Street, as you've heard, across the country at half-mast, no different here at number 10 along Whitehall, the government buildings, also two flying flags at half-mast, and at Parliament around the corner. Now, on Monday, MPs will return a day early from their Easter recess to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. The Prime Minister will lead those tributes, Sir Keir Starmer will respond. It's going to start at 2:30 on Monday afternoon. It's expected that tributes will run for several hours, right up until 10 o'clock at night on Monday evening. Of course, many MPs from across political parties have already expressed their condolences, have praised the work of the Duke. Yesterday, the Cabinet met and ministers took moments to share their recollections of meeting the Duke of Edinburgh. They praised his work as an environmentalist with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Downing Street said that ministers have already received thousands of messages of condolence from all over the world. So Monday will give MPs an opportunity to formally pay tribute to the role that the Duke has played over the last 7 decades. Even though he didn't have a formal constitutional role, he was certainly a major figure in public life, and this will be a moment to reflect that, a sort of mark of respect. As you mentioned as well, a lot of the business of politics as usual, though, is on hold for now. So campaigning for elections on May the 6th, that's for the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senate, for many local councils in England, for police and crime commissioners in England and Wales. Campaigning for all of those is currently suspended. We'll also hear a lot less from ministers over the coming days. A lot of the usual business of government is much more muted over the course of the next few days, so we won't be hearing any big government announcements. It's important to say that this won't impact on the easing of coronavirus restrictions on Monday as planned. That will go ahead as planned, but what we won't see is sort of ministers out touring the television studios, the radio studios, as we would usually expect to see over the next few days. So it's a moment, I think, where Westminster is also sort of putting itself on pause, joining the rest of the nation and the world in reflecting.
Thank you very much, Helen, talking to us from Downing Street this morning.
Let's see, time now is 7:15, Saturday morning.
And we're reflecting on the Duke of Edinburgh's personality and his different roles in public life during his time in service. And we know that the Duke's ability to talk to people from all walks of life more than often left quite a lasting impression on those he met.
Everyone who came across him has a story to tell, and John Maguire has been speaking to people about their memories.
To perform thousands upon thousands of royal visits is their duty, their job. But to make each one feel so special to the people they meet, that is an art form.
The aura just filled the old factory. The Queen, very petite, small lady, but as I said, the aura that she gives off, it was an unbelievable experience.
During the Diamond Jubilee tour of 2012, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh visited the Bailey Caravans factory in Bristol.
The Duke was very interested on how different components were assembled. He had a chat with a lot of the guys on the shop floor. I also remember, he was smiling, laughing, very engaging man. It was just a wonderful experience.
Were you surprised at all that he was interested in the nuts and bolts, let's put it that way?
Yes, I was. Yeah. And at one point, each station, fit various components, and he actually commented on the fact that the way that the caravans are assembled are very similar to the way that they build boats.
But what stays with Simon about that day was not just the Duke's intellectual curiosity, but his tenderness.
It was obviously the day job for them, they do it a lot, but they were so good at putting people at their ease, being engaging with them, and everyone sort of felt, having met them, that they were special in some way. Probably my favourite or my fondest memory of the day, it was quite cold, and I remember when the Queen and Prince Philip were leaving, Prince Philip got into the car and he picked the blanket up off the seat and he put it across the Queen's knees to keep her warm, which I thought was lovely, and it sort of reminded me above all else that they're a very loving married couple.
And for Steve, it was his rapier-like sense of humour that was unforgettable.
When they were both leaving, the Queen and the Duke, I was up by the top opening the front door for them to let them out, obviously, and there was a bit of rubbish on the floor, so I quickly picked it up, not realising my gold chains fell out the top. When he looked at me twice, gave me a big smile, and said, "Don't you believe in banks, sir?" I totally shocked he actually spoke, and I said, "No, sir, I don't. No, sir, I don't." But it was a real honour to meet him and to speak to him. Amazing.
As sharp as a tack and aged in his early 90s. The Queen's representative in Bristol, the Lord Lieutenant, has more fond memories of jokes about gold chains.
I can remember when he came to Bristol, and the Lord Mayor at the time was Colin Smith, and he and I were waiting to receive His Royal Highness, and he came into the back, and of course Colin had all the chains on, and the Duke of Edinburgh went up to him and he went, "Thump, thump, thump. Is that real gold?" So I can imagine, as a grandfather, he really delighted his grandchildren. He could get up to the best devilment.
Those who met Prince Philip speak of a burning desire to discover more about engineering, art, the environment, but also people's lives.
It's really lovely to see you. How are you? You okay?
Michaela tells me she met him while raising awareness of disability issues.
Because I'm also deaf, in events where there's a crowded room, I bring my chair off a little bit higher, which allows me to be at eye level with people and allows me to lift with them. And he walked over to us and he looked at me and went, "Wow, look at your wheelchair. That's really cool. I love how high you are." And it gave us a lovely opportunity to talk about how much technology has advanced and allowed us to be equal people and equal citizens. It was just a lovely little human moment between the three of us.
In 1957, he saw the abandoned ship, the SS Great Britain, as he piloted a seaplane over the Falkland Islands. And 12 years later, they would be reunited.
The mission to bring the SS Great Britain back to the UK from the Falkland Islands was an incredible story, fraught with risk and adventure, just the type of thing the Duke of Edinburgh was interested in. And in fact, on the day that it returned to this dock here in Bristol, the one where it was built, he was on board to witness its return.
He became the very first patron of the ship's trust.
What do you think? Don't ask me.
And that love of the sea and aviation combined perfectly at the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset.
He was Royal Marines, so he was a Captain General and always was a keen supporter of all things Royal Navy, but in particular naval heritage and all of the museums which now form part of the National Museum of the Royal Navy.
Before stepping back from public life 4 years ago, the Duke of Edinburgh took part in hundreds of tours and engagements each year, part of his everyday, which for those who met him created an unforgettable day. John Maguire, BBC News.
Well, of course, royal visits were part and parcel of the Duke's life, and he's been remembered fondly for his long life of public service. So let's just take a look back at some of those moments.
Prince Philip asked, "Why aren't you at school?" to me and Sasha.
He asked you why you weren't at school, and what did you say?
Because we came here to see you.
Refused to go in any of the lifts, wanted to walk around the whole of the new development and really felt it was a wonderful addition to English cricket.
Come into the station and walk down the line of crew with the boss introducing him to every crewman. It was an excitable thing because none of us had been in this position before, and we'd spent a lot of time cleaning and making sure everything was spotless for the visit. You was even polishing your shoes because he's a Navy person like, so we wanted to look our best. He's going to be missed. There's a big hole to fill there.
There's a strike. Oh, I see. Well, why aren't you at home doing all the work at home instead of in school? I see. All right.
Well, he arrived with a twinkle in his eye, and I was told not to be allowed to be taken off course by him. But after we'd shown him into the main studio, he said, "Well, what's in that room there?" And that was the spare studio, and it was the one room he wasn't to go in. He also noticed some patients and staff on a neighbouring ward. One of the windows was partially open, so he stuck his head through it.
It was a Millennium service. There was a walkabout on a wide street between the Minster and the Assembly Rooms, and the Queen went down one side and the Duke the other. And it was quite clear that the people on the Duke's side were a bit disappointed that the Queen wasn't on their side. And there were a lot of young people, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, with little posies of flowers. And the Duke lifted them over the barrier, and he was then around 80, lifted them over the barrier and said, "Now go and give your flowers to the Queen." And of course, that was the most brilliant thing to have done.
I will now pay particular attention because you're going to see the world's most experienced pluck unveiling. This is merely to declare that the place is a bit more open than it was before.
I think one of the things we're going to see during the morning, we're hearing more and more people's reflections from moments they met him, is the ability to sort of disarm a room from some of the, maybe the atmosphere, the anxiety people had about meeting a major royal figure. So here's another one for you. The scene is his 50th birthday. It's 1971. The Queen and Prince Philip visited a shipyard at Barrow in Furness.
And there they met a pair of twin sisters who remember the encounter to this day. And they spoke to our correspondent, Judith Moritz.
Today at Barrow, the first of a new class of British warship takes the water.
The launch of HMS Sheffield in 1971 was a momentous day, a real royal occasion. And for two people in particular, it was very special.
Twin sisters Sheila and Anne present the traditional bouquet to the Queen. The sisters represent the twin industries of shipbuilding and engineering.
50 years on, Sheila and Anne remember meeting the Queen and especially the Duke of Edinburgh.
It was an honour to represent the town. Yeah.
And it's not every day you get to meet the Queen and a prince in one day, is it?
But it was also the 50th birthday of the Duke, so the whole atmosphere was absolutely amazing.
And you remember him putting you at ease?
As he came towards us, you could almost see him smiling. He was dying to ask us questions.
I think he was just so in awe that there was two girls that were so similar that he thought he would have a little joke.
He just said to us, "You're so alike. You really must get up to some kind of fun with your boyfriends and doing swapping." We just laughed it off and said, "No, we don't really."
But of course, the photograph that got caught was this business where he's doing this, which is, you know, do you swap boyfriends? But that was it.
He had a twinkle in his eye.
Oh, yes. Yeah, a little bit of fun, you know what he was like. What's this one? Happy birthday from the gorgeous girls.
The twins were surprised to find themselves in next day's papers. Sheila has kept all the mementos. Which one of you is which?
I'll have to I think...
You're not sure?
No, I'm not. Just a minute. We were in every daily paper. And I do remember one of the managers from Vickers at the time said, "Crikey, you wouldn't think that they'd launched a ship yesterday."
Less about the ship, more about you.
More about the twins and his birthday. Yeah.
Memories of the day have sadly outlasted HMS Sheffield, which was sunk during the Falklands conflict. As for the twins, they'll never forget the Duke and the fun few moments they shared.
He was a very handsome man, wasn't he? You know,
yes.
He was dashing, wasn't he? Especially when he had his uniform. I mean, who doesn't like a man in a uniform, you know?
Just looking back as well to the crowds that an event like that would attract back in the 1970s, extraordinary moments.
We're going to think a little bit about sporting connections now. Abby, sporting events going on, obviously, Mike, and some reflection from some places about...
Oh, yes, and so many sporting memories. I mean, he was patron of hundreds of sporting organisations and a skilled participant. He really got stuck in as well, and things like polo, carriage driving, we've heard lots about, but also sailing. Remember in the early 90s, covering Cows Week, the regatta down there. It was always such a regular part of it. Really threw himself onto the water and into all the activities afterwards. Absolutely brilliant, and everybody loved it. Brought such energy to the place as well. Yeah, so right across the sporting world, tributes have been paid to the Duke. Flags were flown at half-mast at a number of venues, including Wembley and all 9 county cricket grounds. Players wore black armbands, and there was a minute's silence at the Premier League match between Fulham and Wolves. And that will be the case across all professional matches in England and Scotland this weekend. There was also a period of silence ahead of England women's match against France last night. Prince Philip was president of the Football Association in the 1950s. And across football today, players, coaches and match officials will be wearing black armbands. The Grand National does go ahead at Aintree later today. There will be a 2-minute silence while jockeys will be invited to wear black armbands there, and flags will be flown at half-mast at the racecourse. Yesterday there was a 2-minute silence before the first race of the day, with jockeys, trainers and officials all united in this mark of respect. So the Duke of Edinburgh's sporting activities provided him with a welcome opportunity to get away from more formal royal duties. For him, sport became an outlet for his restless energy. And Prince Philip also proved himself to be a keen and talented competitor in a number of different sports. Our correspondent Andy Swiss now looks back at the Duke's sporting life.
Prince Philip always enjoyed sport and he often excelled at it. At school, he learned to love sailing, and as a wedding present, he and the Queen were given a Dragon-class yacht, Blue Bottle. His main sailing companion was the socialite Uffa Fox, who became a lifelong friend. The two of them acquired something of a playboy image, although it didn't detract from their sailing prowess. Uffa Fox once said of his sailing mate, "I've never known anyone to take a boat across the tide as skillfully as he does." Prince Philip would take part in the Royal Regatta at Cowes for the next 50 years.
People in our modern kind of technological era, it really doesn't matter to them whether it rains or it blows or it's wet or it's cold. You just get indoors, or you. The thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
And now a change of bowling from the pavilion end.
As an enthusiastic cricketer, he also drew praise from high places.
And that one moved across the leg.
He has a perfect action for a right-hand off-spin bowler.
Prince Philip would often play so others could benefit. He was a firm believer in recreation for all and raised huge amounts of money over the years for the Playing Fields Association. But it was on the polo field that the Duke was to grab most of the limelight, becoming one of the top 4 players in Britain in the mid-1960s, even though he'd started relatively late in the sport. He also made it more popular. The Duke's presence on the field put polo into the gossip columns.
He attracted spectators to come and watch, and they were rarely coming to watch him, not the polo, but of course they then, or some of them, got interested in polo and made a habit of watching it.
He had to stop playing polo when he was 50 because of arthritis in his hands. But he'd noticed another equestrian sport far more popular in countries like Germany and Hungary, which he threw himself into.
Go on, you stupid hole! Get on! Go on!
Carriage driving became his new passion. He was even responsible for drawing up the rules and worked tirelessly to raise the profile of the sport, as well as competing in the British team.
Great Britain was represented by George Bowman.
His fellow teammate George Bowman was one of the more unlikely friendships the Prince made in his sporting life.
I was a scrap merchant. And of course, he was a prince. And at times people made a lot about this. But he never treated me any different. He always looked at me like an equal. And that was one of the things I really admired about him.
Despite some hair-raising spills along the way, such as here when his carriage hit a concrete block, the Duke carried on driving well into old age. In Greek, the name Philip means lover of horses, and the way he handled his animals was a measure of both the man and his sportsmanship.
Yes, the Duke's sporting life. And in that report, we heard the phrase how the Duke was so passionate about recreation for all, and that really was a cornerstone of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards and how it helped millions of people, young people, get access for the first time to a new sport or activity and have a go at something new. And I've seen that firsthand, handing out some of the awards, the Gold Award winners myself. And it's brilliant how it can transform lives, sport. And that's been a real part of that.
Well, we're going to talk to one brilliant sports person just now about that very subject.
Yeah, as Mike was saying, Duke of Edinburgh Award, many people consider it to be one of the Prince's greatest achievements. It's helped enrich the lives of millions of young people right back from 1956.
And the five-time Paralympic champion Hannah Cockcroft completed her bronze award while she was at school and had the opportunity to meet the Duke on a number of occasions. And Hannah joins us now. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Hannah. Just tell us a bit about your time doing that bronze award. And I know one of the reasons you didn't progress to the other awards is because your racing career inevitably took over. But what did it involve and what did you learn from it?
I did all sorts in my bronze awards. At the time, I didn't do any sports. I wanted to actually be a police officer. So the Duke of Edinburgh Award sent me on an experience day at West Yorkshire Police. They put me on a policing course. I found out that there are no disabled people in the police. And then another of the sections is physical. So I had to take up some kind of physical exercise to complete the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And I initially actually found wheelchair basketball. So that was my step into Paralympic sport. So you could kind of say that without the Duke of Edinburgh Award, I wouldn't be where I am now.
That's amazing, isn't it? And it wasn't just the introduction to sport. It was also the fact that to an extent you had to go out and be self-sufficient, but also work as a team and learn to ask for help, which again was something that you didn't always embrace willingly, as I understand it.
Yeah, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards really pushed me out of my comfort zone, let's say that. But as a disabled child, you know, I didn't leave the house without my parents pretty much. And a massive part of the award is going on an expedition. So, yeah, I had to go with a team of my school friends and we had to go on a long hike. And at the time, I hated my wheelchair. I didn't go near it. I tried to walk as many places as I could. And going on that really made me, I guess, just accept my disability, accept that I am a wheelchair user. This is going to make my life easier because I definitely wouldn't have got through it without it. But I just learned, like you say, I learned so much that trip about myself, but also the Duke of Edinburgh just teaches you life skills, like you say, teamwork, organisation, perseverance, confidence. It really brought me out of myself and made me independent, which was amazing because I think I would have been about 14 years old at the time, so definitely needed.
Hannah, we're seeing one or two images of you meeting the Duke of Edinburgh himself. Now, you'll be well aware, and we're hearing some of the stories this morning at breakfast. It's really charming, actually, of encounters with the Prince when people met him and the way he kind of had his own way of going about business, sometimes sort of disarming people in a way and just making people feel relaxed. What was your experience of that?
Yeah, the Prince definitely put you at ease when you meet him. Obviously, it's quite a nerve-wracking time when you're in the palace or you're about to meet the Queen. You don't want to put a foot wrong. So he just comes in and he's no formalities. He's just so relaxed and so interested. I think that's the part that I love the most about him. He was never afraid to ask a question. He wanted to do everything right. I remember one of the times that I met him, he was quite concerned because I'm a wheelchair user. He was quite concerned that he was looking down on me. And he said, well, how would you prefer that I spoke to you as a wheelchair user? Do you want me to crouch down next to you? Do you mind if I look down? You tell me what to do and I'll do that. And the funny thing is, people every day don't ask you that. So it's the last thing you expect to hear from the Duke of Edinburgh. But he really wanted to get it right. And I just think that was lovely.
It's interesting. Mike Bushell was just saying to us a moment ago, he's been at many of those award ceremonies for the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And there was a tangible excitement, a sort of frisson when he came in the room. And it really mattered that he was personally involved and his name was on the project, but he was very personally linked. Individually, he would take time to talk to everyone.
Yeah, I've presented quite a few Gold Awards now. And he really does take his time just going through all the young people. He wants to know their stories. He wants to know where they've been, what they've learnt. And I think it's amazing. Like you say, his name is the award, but you don't always expect to meet the person behind it. And he really took the time out to do that and showed an interest. And some of the young people have done incredible things, from kayaking down the Dordogne to climbing mountains to volunteering in Africa, all through the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. So it just shows that anything is possible.
And are you confident that the award will survive him now, that legacy is enduring?
Yes, definitely. I think it's built such a name for itself and it's such a valuable thing for young people to do. And I hope that the more people that hear about it now, obviously, like in the sad passing of Prince Philip, that people will get involved and want to survive that legacy. And honestly, it's one of the best things I did when I was younger. So if that's a message I can put out there, then get involved, because it is amazing.
Hannah, it's so brilliant to talk to you this morning.
Yeah, you've just done it, Hannah. The message is loud and clear. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. I do wonder if they'll get a spike in applicants actually to do the award scheme, because so much has been spoken about it over the last couple of days. If you've been involved in any way, whether it's you or your children or grandchildren maybe, do let us know about the impact it's had on your life and their lives at BBC Breakfast if you want to get in touch.
7:41. We're talking a lot this morning about personal recollections, those encounters that Hannah's been talking about, but also to do with his links with different parts of the UK.
And Prince Philip, we know, had a particularly close association with Scotland, dating back to his school days in the 1930s.
Yes, he and the Queen have enjoyed holidays with the family at Balmoral, of course, every autumn for many decades. Glenn Campbell has this report.
At Holyrood Palace, the lion rampant is lowered, as the city that has long shared its name with the Duke of Edinburgh takes in the news, posted on the palace gates, that His Royal Highness has died, 2 months short of his 100th birthday.
I do feel incredibly sad. I think it would be a great loss, and he was a real character.
The Prince has been around for 99 years and has been at the Queen's side the entire time. So it's a huge loss to the country, especially given his long service.
In Ballater on Royal Deeside, some remember a prince they met in person.
We're walking in Ballacbooey Forest, and this black Range Rover came up, and the Duke got out and was fixing something at the side of the road. He must have been 94.
A character that we can all identify with. Yeah, sad. And I feel so sorry for the dear Queen.
From his school days to big national moments like the opening of the Scottish Parliament, the Duke of Edinburgh's association with Scotland was lifelong. The royal couple were regular attenders of the Highland Games when they summered at Balmoral.
I think Prince Philip loved Aberdeenshire because of the peace and quiet, and indeed the outdoors. A man who was an accomplished sportsman. He loved attending the Braemar Gathering, the Ballater Games. I think he loved the competitive nature of Highland Games.
In Glasgow, more memories and reflections.
Absolutely gutted. I honestly thought that he was going to get to the 100. I think a lot of people actually wished that he was going to get to that 100, and gutted for the Queen.
I did the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, and that is something very positive he's gave to the community.
And from Inverness,
you kind of felt that it was coming, but it was still a bit of a shock at the same time when you heard about it.
Yeah, it was just like a shame you didn't make it to like 100. Like, it was so close to like his 100th, and he was like a pillar of like the royal family and like quite an icon.
more tributes will be paid at Holyrood on Monday when Parliament is recalled to remember a remarkable prince. Glenn Campbell, Edinburgh.
Reflections on the Duke's connections with Scotland.
So, 7:44 Saturday morning, of course.
Now, last November, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh celebrated 73 years of marriage.
And over the years, they have both reflected on their unique partnership, which was one of enduring devotion and support.
The fact of the matter is that a marriage involves two partners. When there's lots to do, time seems to fly, and it appears to us at least that we've been fairly busy over the last 50 years, and the time has of course flashed past. Until, that is, you start looking back and try to recall what things were like 50 years ago, and you begin to realize how much has changed. In the autumn of 1947 we got married. Everyone seemed to think that our wedding was a very happy occasion and brought a little colour back to life after the dreary war years. We certainly thought so. We were then fortunate to enjoy 5 happy years of fairly conventional married life, and that included 2 years with a home of our own in Malta while I was in the Navy. Of course, this period came to an abrupt end when the Queen had the melancholy duty of succeeding her father after his premature death in 1952. She was 25 and I was 30, and we had 2 small children. And life, as you can imagine, changed dramatically in many ways. But it had much less effect on our married life than I anticipated. And then after an interval of 10 hectic years, we had 2 more children and were more or less settled into our new way of life. And like all families, we went through the full range of pleasures and tribulations of bringing up children. Much can be done by an individual, but I'm sufficiently old-fashioned to believe that a great deal more can be achieved by a partnership in marriage.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner.
The main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Well, there are many aspects of the Duke's life that are covered in the papers this morning, and his marriage, of course, is one of them. But let's just take a look at the front pages, shall we, first of all, starting with the Daily Telegraph, which has an image of Prince Philip in his military uniform for its front page. Prince Philip joined the Royal Navy in 1939, went on to become one of the youngest first lieutenants. His naval career ended when his father-in-law, King George VI, died.
Goodbye, my beloved, is the Daily Mirror's headline, with the image you can see there of the Duke alongside the Queen. They are married for more than 70 years.
The Daily Mail features a similar headline on its front page, calling it the Queen's heartbreaking tribute to her husband.
A deep sorrow reads the headline on the front of the Daily Express. The paper describes the Duke as indomitable. So we're joined now by the Royal Historian Professor Kate Williams and Sir Craig Oliver, who of course was former Downing Street Director of Communications. Very good morning to both of you. I wonder, Craig, if I can start with you and a thought process. I'm just mindful that those words we heard a moment ago of the Queen and Prince Philip talking, and they didn't talk about it much, about how their relationship worked. And right at the core of all this, and we're talking about the coverage, is a personal loss. And that it's really important to remember that in everything we say and do at the moment.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Charlie. And I think that actually the papers do very well in terms of getting that across. It's a cliche to say that a picture paints 1,000 words, but they've all gone for very striking images on their front page to try and sum up more than just the image perhaps shows on a surface level. I think that the front page of the Daily Mail, where the Queen is looking rather adoringly at Philip, is very striking. And the Mirror is a picture of him looking rather adoringly at him. But strangely, I think probably the most affecting front page is the Daily Star. There's an image of the back of his head at his last engagement, and he's tipping his hat as if he's saying goodbye. And I think that rather well sums up the duty, the honour, the steadfastness that everybody's been talking about, but also the sadness of somebody passing after such a long and great life.
There's a huge amount of commentary in the papers this morning, Kate, and these great wraparound front pages with the pictures Craig Oliver was describing there, and then endless descriptions inside the papers of his life, and then questions about kind of what next. But is any of that a surprise to you in terms of where he stood in our public life?
I think that, yes, the papers are commemorating these big commemorative editions, talking a lot about his legacy, about his charity work, the Duke of Edinburgh Award that you were just talking about with Hannah Cockcroft, conservation, everything that he's done. And I think particularly as a historian, I particularly like seeing all the focus on his family, on Princess Alice, who suffered a lot in his childhood and later became, she was later in Greece. She sheltered many Jewish people during World War II. And he leaves such a great gap in the royal family and British society, even though he retired just a few years ago in 2017. I mean, it's very sad to think that the Queen, she's had a reign of milestones. It's been the Golden Jubilee, the longest reigning monarch, the Diamond Jubilee, and next year It's her platinum jubilee. She's the first British monarch to celebrate that, and one of only a handful in the world. And she will not do it with him by her side. It would have also been his 70 years as consort, the longest serving consort, a consort who both supported her all the way through, right from the moment in 1952 when he had to tell her that she was queen and her beloved father had died, a role that she was catapulted in and he was catapulted into much earlier than they had expected. But also, as President Obama was saying in his long essay he wrote on his personal page yesterday, saying that he found a way to lead without demanding the spotlight, both through service in World War II, but also as a consort, particularly through championing British industry. This was post-war Britain, it was a recession, and Philip's advocacy of industry and design as a way of creating commercial solutions for both industry and people's lives was so important. So he really did carve out his own role, be a CEO of the family and support the Queen. It was striking to see yesterday on the BBC obituary show, Princess Anne saying that you could always talk to him and you could go to him with a problem and he'd always try to help.
Craig, just join up a few dots for us using your own experience, because of course you with ITN news capacity and at the BBC as well, then in communications with David Cameron. Join us up some links between the planning around funeral arrangements and the link between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace and with the media more generally. We're awaiting, of course, details specifically, but I'm just thinking about how much thought goes into that in advance.
There's a huge amount of thought that goes into it, Charlie, and probably every couple of months the Palace would pull together a lot of institutions around the state and basically make sure that they were all lined up and understanding of what was likely to happen in the event of a death of a major royal. They called each of the events, they had a particular title for them, they were all named after a different bridge for some particular reason, and you'd often talk through that in detail. And the other thing I think people are surprised to hear is that often when I was in number 10, you would see something go into the diary that was basically the recording of a tribute to somebody from their obituary while they were still alive. So often very significant figures. And that's what's really interesting about this one. I think that almost as soon as Prince Philip, it was announced that he died, you saw this flood of material come out there. And it reveals really what some people I think are slightly surprised is the degree of preparation that goes in to make sure that you capture a significant death like this.
And so, Craig, can I ask you, it's right, of course, that time and attention is given to such a significant public figure. Some people will say the coverage is too much. But what do you think the Duke himself would have made of it all?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that he said that he didn't want fuss, he doesn't want to lie in state. And he's obviously a figure that didn't like a lot of flummery. One of the things that I think that really shines out of the coverage today is that a figure that was very tightly boundaried and was in the strictures of a role where he had to be 2 steps behind the Queen and supporting her all the time. And yet this amazing character was bursting out all the time. He was a figure that all of us sort of had throughout our lives for a very long time and had a real sense of his personality, even though the tight boundaries of his role were supposed to be supporting, not saying very much. And I think it's actually an extraordinary tribute to him that he managed to do that while also being seen as such a steadfast support to the Queen.
Kate, do you want to pick up on that theme? Because I think it's very true. You know, he was at the heart of the royal institution and yet very much had his own way of going about business.
Yes, that's true. And there are comparisons made to Prince Albert, but this was completely different. The Queen had a constitutional role, and it was made very clear to Prince Philip that he wouldn't be sitting in on prime ministerial meetings or advising. He would be an unofficial advisor. So he was asked, were people talking to you when you became consort? Did they tell you what to do? And he said, no, I had to make it up, go along my own way. And really, I think the fact that he did so much, 22,000 engagements, over 750 organisations he was a patron of, conservation with the World Wildlife Fund, particularly in 1961 when he set it up, and particularly, you know, the focus on animals, not just animals, but also their habitat, that you have to conserve where they live, the Duke of Edinburgh Award that you've been discussing. And I think we also have to remember that after, when Prince Philip came into the family, there was a lot of anti-German prejudice, xenophobia against him. There were people saying the Queen should never have married him, even though he had, you know, all this service on the Allied side, this brave service. He saved so many men's lives. He had to overcome a lot of prejudice against him, even against him setting up the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which seems incredible to us now. It's given so many young people so much. So he, as someone who's through that in the early days of, I think, some adversity, he really has become someone who was such a crucial CEO of the family firm, which he called it himself, and a support to the Queen and this consort, and all these tributes that Craig was just talking about in the papers. They really draw out the fact that Prince Philip, a man who was a refugee, a man who came from a family who really, he said he had no fixed home, no fixed abode, became someone who devoted himself to the monarchy and to the Queen.
And Kate, in the short time that we have left, again, a lot of the papers are asking, what does this mean for the Queen now, both personally and professionally, for her role in public life in the future? Even though he was in the background in his later years, what impact do you think it will have?
Well, it's very hard for the Queen. He's always been there for her, and particularly last year, also due to COVID, they've been bubbling together. And Christmas, which is normally a large royal occasion, was really just the two of them and the Windsor staff and Windsor Castle. So she spent a lot of time with him. And we know also, due to the COVID restrictions, it's not like all her relations can gather around and look after her in the next few days. It's quite restricted about who we can meet inside. So it's very hard for her. But I think that because of the private funeral that's coming up next weekend, that will be very comforting to her. And she is in a period of mourning, possibly for much longer. And certainly I think this is something that the Duke had lived great long years. It's very sad he didn't make his 100 years. It was great long years. But it's very hard for her, for the first time, to be without someone who she's known. She's been friends with since she was 13. She met much earlier than that. He's always been in her life. He's always been supporting her, and now she is alone.
Kate, thank you very much. That's Professor Kate Williams, author, royal historian. And Sir Craig Oliver, thank you to you as well, of course, former Director of Communications for David Cameron. Thank you both very much. Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burton and Charlie Stayt.
Our headlines today. Gun salutes will take place across the UK to mark the death of the Duke of Edinburgh at the age of 99.
Details about the Duke's funeral are due to be released later as the royal family mourns the loss of a beloved husband and father.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
The man and his legacy. This morning on Breakfast, we'll speak to personal friends of the Duke and those whose lives he touched.
Those tributes, the military gun salutes, will take place at the 4 national capitals and at military bases, ships offshore, and also here at the Portsmouth Naval Base.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 10th of April. The Armed Forces will lead a second day of tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, who died yesterday, aged 99, with gun salutes across the UK, in Gibraltar and from warships at sea.
Details of his funeral are also expected to be announced later today. Prince Philip was a constant support to the Queen during more than 70 years of marriage.
In a special programme on Breakfast this morning, we are looking back on his life with some of those who knew the Duke well, also the people whose lives were touched by his charitable endeavours and public duties. And we're discussing how his legacy will live on.
First, though, our royal correspondent Nicholas Ritchell has this report.
Windsor Castle, where the Duke spent much of the past year in isolation with the Queen, where he died yesterday morning, and where it's expected his funeral will take place in St George's Chapel in about a week from now. Further details of the arrangements are expected to be given by Buckingham Palace later today. The Duke's death will be a grievous loss for the Queen after their 73 years of marriage. Last night on a BBC programme, their eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time. in order to allow her to take on that role.
It was in August 2017 on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that the Duke carried out his final solo engagement, inspecting a parade by the Royal Marines. It was pouring with rain, yet the Duke, who was then 96, was not to be deterred. Duty came first that day, as it had for so many decades, so often alongside the Queen, but also pursuing his own public programme, to which he brought his own famously forthright style. But the public image of the Duke walking a few paces behind his wife only tells part of the story. His greatest contribution was the unseen support he gave to the Queen as she coped with the often solitary role of head of state. Occasionally, she alluded to it. "He is my constant strength and guide," she said during the Diamond Jubilee. He was the one person she could always turn to. Just before his 90th birthday, the Duke had said in a BBC interview that he felt it was time to wind down.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say.
Yet it wasn't until 6 years later and that parade in the pouring rain on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that there was any real evidence that he was retiring. Now the Queen must continue without him. The world will pay its tributes to a man of strong personality who made a significant contribution to the nation's life. And his family will mourn a much-loved father, grandfather, great-grandfather and husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now outside Windsor Castle by our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell and from Buckingham Palace by our reporter Sangeeta Maiska. Sarah, first of all, Windsor being the centre of activity we know over the next few days, what do we know about the plans so far?
Yes, indeed. It's fairly quiet here this morning, but starting to get a little busier. The Union flags we know are flying at half-mast across all royal residences and government buildings, but I'm looking up the Royal Standard, of course, is flying as normal. The Queen is in residence here, resident at the place where yesterday it was announced that her husband had passed away. And the two of them have spent much of the last year here shielding during lockdown. It's the place where they celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary, where almost a year ago he celebrated his 99th birthday. And going forward now, amidst the Queen's grief, as people will know who've lost loved ones, you have to make decisions, carry on, think about funeral arrangements, and that's what she will have been doing yesterday and today. And as soon as those plans have been approved, they will be made public. And I think what has been made absolutely clear is that the priority will be to observe COVID restrictions, trying to prevent any public gatherings. So any public activity behind me, obviously you can see any plans that there might have been for any sort of public funeral procession now will not happen. As I say, exact details to be given later today. Just to let you know some other things that are happening, if you can still hear me, that at midday today there will be a death gun salute. Now this is 41 rounds, one fired every minute for 40 minutes will be fired in cities across the UK, in Gibraltar and on various ships at sea. Of course, these are very traditional in any big significant royal event, but particularly poignant, I think, today, bearing in mind Prince Philip's strong association with the armed forces. I should reiterate the guidance, the royal guidance, the government guidance that people are asking people not to gather at royal residences, to maybe consider giving a donation to charity rather than leaving flowers, and to leave any messages that they wish to leave in the online book of condolence, which now has been opened at the royal website. I did just take a wander down actually to Windsor Great Park, where yesterday lots of flowers had been left. Those were gathered up late last night and taken inside the grounds of Windsor Castle, and there's a handful of bunches which have already been left today. And one of those messages read, "Extraordinary man, extraordinary life, national hero, nothing more needs to be said."
Yeah, competing with horses, hooves and cobbles, but we heard you loud and clear, Sarah. And just give us a sense of behind the scenes, if you can, of just how events unfolded yesterday and how the nation learnt the news about what had happened.
Well, of course, the announcement was released. It was just after midday when it was released, the statement from the palace saying that Prince Philip, the Queen's beloved husband, had passed away. And really, from that point, I think what was extraordinary was the speed of the tributes, the level of tributes from across the world. I was based at Buckingham Palace yesterday. I was surrounded by 30 or 40 news crews from channels from across the globe. I think it really struck home that Prince Philip was a national figure, yes, in British life, but he was also very much a global figure. And what also struck me, I think, was there were hundreds of people that were going to Buckingham Palace. Some of them were in London anyway, but because they heard the news, they wanted to go there, but they were of all ages. And Prince Philip meant something to people of all ages. One woman that I spoke to said, look, he's been around since I've been born, you know, he's just part of my life. And I think that's what, you know, people are feeling. And also people very interested to hear and read all the tributes and maybe to learn a little bit more about a man that they thought they might have known. They'd seen him walk 2 steps behind the Queen. They'd seen him waving from the balcony at Buckingham Palace, but actually then finding out about his, you know, links with industry, that his environmentalism, which was, you know, he was pioneering years before it became such an issue that it is today. And all of these things perhaps that people didn't really know about Prince Philip, I think people are learning now, and it's been sort of interesting to see the reaction from people both young and old.
Thank you so much. That's Sarah talking from Windsor.
So let's go now to Buckingham Palace. Our correspondent Sangeeta Maiska is there for us this morning. Sangeeta, morning to you. Sarah was making reference to the fact that Buckingham Palace as well is telling people abide by travel restrictions, you know, keep in tune with social distancing regulations as they stand. And that necessarily is changing how things are down there. Tell us a little more.
Yeah, absolutely right, Charlie. If you take a look behind me, this, of course, Buckingham Palace, that iconic scene so many times. We've seen Prince Philip stand side by side with the Queen on the balcony behind me. Central, really, this building to the public life of the UK. And of course, as a result, yesterday when people started hearing the news that Prince Philip had passed away, many people came here with flowers, with wreaths, floral tributes of all kinds to come and lay them outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. In the early hours of this morning, most of those were taken up and taken inside the gates. And you're right, the palace is very mindful of the fact that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. Yes, restrictions are easing, but people are still being asked to stay local. And as a result, I think what they're trying to do is avoid creating a site, if you like, for people to come and look at. What has been left behind, however, are some really tender personal tributes that have been tied to the gates of the palace itself. Let me read a couple of them to you. Almost all of them, really, the sentiment saying, we recognise that Prince Philip played an essential role and paying tribute to his service and his sense of duty. Here's one. To our unsung hero, Prince Philip, 65 years of service, 73 years of marriage to our beloved Queen. Thank you and R.I.P. We've heard so much, haven't we, in the last few hours and the whole of yesterday about his life as a naval officer. And he was one, of course, when he first met the then Princess Elizabeth. This one I really like. Fair winds following seas. Now, that's a phrase used by sailors to wish fellow sailors a good onward journey. And I think it's the nature of the kind of tenderness of these messages that really strikes you when you start reading them one after the other, tied so closely to those gates. As you say, both the government and the palace very mindful of COVID restrictions, asking people not to turn up here in large numbers. If you do, you will be asked to leave your flowers, and then you'll be moved gently on by the police. The virus is still endemic in the community, and as Sarah was saying so eloquently, all of the arrangements for Prince Philip's funeral have, of course, been impacted by that. But very much in the tradition of public service, public life, the palace today saying, please be thoughtful about how you would like to pay tribute to Prince Philip, and suggesting that people choose a charity and make a donation as a nice way of remembering the Duke of Edinburgh.
Sangeeta, thank you.
Well, Edinburgh Castle will be one of the landmarks across the UK that will hold a 41-gun salute to honour Prince Philip later today. The Duke had a long and close association with Scotland, beginning with his years at Gordonston School. We're joined now by our Scotland correspondent, Alexandra Mackenzie. So, Alexandra, just give us a sense of how people have been remembering him where you are.
Well, I'm at the gates of Holyrood Palace, which is the official residence for the Queen when she's here in Scotland, and it's at the end of the Royal Mile, the opposite end from Edinburgh Castle, which will see the gun salute at midday. Now, it has been quite quiet here. Again, people are being told to pay their respects in other ways and not to come and gather at the palace gates. We have seen a few people come with flowers, but again, those flowers have been removed so that there is no focus of attention here. The flag has been lowered here, as it has been over at the Scottish Parliament, which is just a few steps from here. And the First Minister here, Nicola Sturgeon, she has been leading the tribute. She said she expressed her deepest sympathy on behalf of the people of Scotland to Her Majesty the Queen and the rest of the royal family. She said the Duke of Edinburgh had deep and long-standing ties to Scotland. And you also mentioned Gordonston there earlier. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, he was one of the first pupils at Gordonston, and the principal there said the Gordonston community joined together to convey their condolences, and they expressed how sadly he is going to be missed by the school and their whole community.
Alexandra, thank you very much.
So let's take a moment to look at how the political parties across the UK have been reacting. What we do know is that they have suspended campaigning for the elections on the 6th of May, following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. Let's go to our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's at Downing Street for us this morning. Morning to you, Helen. So just take us through what will be happening in the days ahead and what the implications are for how it affects the ordinary business of politics.
Well, MPs will be returning on Monday, a day earlier than planned, to the Commons so that they can pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. And this will start at 2:30 in the afternoon. The Prime Minister will lead the tribute, so Keir Starmer will respond, and then individual MPs will get up and pay their own tributes throughout the afternoon. It's expected to last several hours, probably running until 10 o'clock on Monday evening. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, said he expects it to be a day of sadness, of fond memories, as well as one thing Prince Philip did have: humour. And of course, many MPs from across political parties have already been expressing their condolences and praising the work that the Duke of Edinburgh did. Yesterday, when the Cabinet met, ministers shared their recollections of meeting the Duke of Edinburgh. They also praised his work as an environmentalist, his work with the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme for young people. So what Monday will do is give MPs this very formal way of marking their own tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, who of course didn't have a formal constitutional role, but obviously played such a huge part in the UK's public life for the last 7 decades. So that is what's happening on Monday. From Tuesday onwards, the Commons will return to business as usual, but it's not entirely going to be politics as usual. So as you mentioned, campaigning has been suspended in the elections that are due to take place on May the 6th. So that is the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senedd, many local councils in England, and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections across England and Wales. Campaigning for those elections is currently suspended, and we will see a change in government activity too. So it'll be more muted. Some planned government announcements won't now be made. We won't get sort of routine press releases, and while if there are important announcements to be made on the public health messaging around coronavirus, we're not going to get other big government announcements. It won't affect the easing of lockdown restrictions in England. That will still go ahead as planned on Monday. But what we won't see is ministers out on visits or doing lots of broadcast interviews as we would usually expect to see, at least in the coming days. And here in Downing Street, the flags are flying at half-mast, as they are along government buildings all along Whitehall, as Westminster joins the rest of the nation and the world in just reflecting.
Helen, thank you.
And on that subject of some of your reflections, we're going to be talking a bit later about the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme that he set up, and some really beautiful memories and thoughts from you about the impact this had on your life. I'll just read one here from Helen as an example. She says, "It was 1978, I was only 17, and the award changed my life. An opportunity to take children whose lives were deeply affected by the Troubles to holiday together, irrespective of religious background. A life-changing experience. To go to the palace to receive my gold award from the Duke was a massive adventure at that time. He was the most charismatic person I have ever met," says Helen. Thank you for sending that in. At BBC Breakfast, and the email address, bbcbreakfast@bbc.co.uk, if you want to get in touch with us.
Saturday morning, 19 minutes past 8. You want to know about 8:21 is the time now. So over the past day, a lot of people, I think, have been reflecting on different parts of Prince Philip's life, and there's been a learning curve for a lot of people about the bits of his life we knew about and some bits we didn't. Some people will have known about his military career, but we are learning a little bit more, aren't we?
We sure are. And in fact, our reporter John Maguire is in Portsmouth this morning, and that is where the Duke completed some of his very early training. John.
Yeah, morning Rachel, morning Charlie, morning to everyone at home as well. We are indeed in Portsmouth, as you say, and you can see the Navy's two brand new aircraft carriers in the distance there, named after the Duke's wife and the Duke's eldest son, the Prince of Wales, and the Queen Elizabeth, the aircraft carriers in the Portsmouth Naval Base. That will be one of the bases that will be firing guns in tribute to the life and, of course, the career of Prince Philip. As you say, joined the Navy just as a young man, served with distinction in the Second World War, mentioned in dispatches, and then, of course, gave up that very promising career when Princess Elizabeth acceded to the throne back at the beginning of the 1950s. For his 70th birthday, the Duke spoke to John Humphreys, who asked him about his career in the Royal Navy.
There's a model here of the ship you commanded, the Magpie. What about that period, being in command of a ship?
But it didn't last very long. I only had her for a year because I then had to. Well, it all got rather difficult. If you remember, the late King was not very well, and it was decided that the Queen that we should go to Canada in 1951. So I had to come back for that. And then the King was going to go to Australia, and he couldn't, so we were sent off on that. And then, of course, he died. So that was the end of the sort of naval career.
I think I've read a comment from you to the effect that the one what if that you regret is that you weren't able to continue a career in the Navy.
Well, it'd be very unnatural if you're in a career and doing reasonably well, not to regret completing it, or at least continuing with it.
Didn't Lord Lewin once say that if you'd stayed on in the Navy, you'd have become First Sea Lord?
Oh, what if? I mean, I don't know. Who can tell?
But it was a regret. You regretted it at the time.
Well, I mean, I think it's only natural. I'm not saying that it's that my heart's pining for the thought. But I mean, just seen in the abstract, it would have been nice to go on. Yes.
Well, someone who did become First Sea Lord is Admiral Sir Jonathan Band. Good morning to you. That what-if question, I know that you asked the Duke of Edinburgh. What did he say to you?
Well, he was quite reticent, really. I mean, he has never done anything but support his line, that he's there for the Queen. But he had such a successful early career, and he was obviously an absolute natural at it, that there must have been an element that I'd wondered what would have happened. And I think probably, the great shock, of course, was the early death of George VI, which, of course, brought everything forward. Because I imagine they probably thought he could have had a career, certainly, for another few years, and he'd made commander and maybe commanded bigger ships, which there's no doubt he would have loved.
And you met him many times over the years, certainly during your service.
Yes.
He always maintained a fascination, an interest in the service.
Oh, deep interest. I mean, he was a naval officer, and people say, what's he like? He's a classic naval officer, direct talking, no flummery, good with people, superb like that. And his knowledge just was tremendous. I mean, whenever we were asked to brief him, we always wondered why we'd actually done that, because he seemed to know more than us. But great interest, and an eye for detail too. He would look at a ship and see the flag that wasn't up, or the line that wasn't quite taut, and pulled our leg.
I heard a great story yesterday that he flew to Norway to meet up with the Royal Marines and was due to have lunch with the commanding officer, but instead of which stayed with the lads and ate out of a mess tin. Is that a typical story, do you think?
Yes, very typical. I mean, he liked people. He was a great believer in the crew. He understood the ship's company's values. And you saw him with a group of sailors and Marines. It was just natural. He knew exactly what to ask them. And that sort of directness and that constant theme of humour. It's always around, you know, this humorous comments.
And I think what we're learning, particularly over the last 24 hours, for people perhaps who are slightly younger, he seemed to be something of a reformer, a radical, really. Of course, the service has changed greatly over, indeed during your service, but over those last decades, especially since the war. What would he have made of that?
Well, I think there were times where it probably disturbed him, some of the changes. But no, he was a reformer, and he certainly embraced the changes that we had to make, both on the social side, bringing the late girls into the service, and our equal opportunities policy. I remember talking to him about that. And he was a great believer in the services have to reflect the society they serve.
Right.
And so he was entirely for that. I mean, some of the more new technology he got very excited about, as you know. He had that interest in engineering and technology, always interested in what the latest ideas were. I'm sure I never had to talk to him about cyber warfare, but I mean, I imagine he would have been into that as well. I mean, that was very much his buzz, constantly modernising.
And what we'll see today, of course, these gun salutes, great Navy traditions, great military traditions, reserved for some of our most important occasions. What will that mean for the service to take part in those ceremonies?
Well, I think immense. I mean, he is known in the services and in the country as a naval officer. So this is the way you say goodbye to great sailors. I mean, if there's regret in the circumstances we're in, is that obviously some of the pageantry that might have gone with a more formal funeral won't be possible and won't be appropriate, because I think the Navy would like to do that.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us this morning, Admiral Sir Jonathan Band. Yes, perhaps one of the most apt descriptions of Prince Philip that you'll hear today, or indeed over the next few days. A typical naval officer, and from one distinguished naval officer to another, perhaps no greater tribute.
John, thank you. Thanks.
And more from John in Portsmouth later, but right now we can speak to the former First Sea Lord, Admiral Lord West, who met Prince Philip on a number of occasions. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Famously, and I'm sure you'll know this, it was said that he actually wanted to join the Air Force, but he must have had the sea life in his blood somewhere for his career in the Navy to be so prestigious.
Yeah, absolutely. When I interviewed him for a programme I was making on the history of the Royal Navy in the 20th century, I was told by his office, they said, well, he's very busy, you'll only get 10 to 15 minutes. And of course, once I sat down and started chatting to him, he had such a deep interest in the Navy. We went on for almost an hour, and finally his staff were getting so agitated that we sort of had to help almost by saying that we had to go to get out the way. And it was in that interview was the first time ever I heard him say that he had wanted to join the Royal Air Force. And it was that his uncle Mountbatten, Dickie Mountbatten, had said, no, this would be not a good idea. I'm jolly glad he didn't, I have to say. I shouldn't say that, should I, about his sister service? But that was the first time I'd ever heard it. And it was quite a surprise. But he loved flying. And of course, we have the big flying arm in the Navy. But at that stage, it was not run by the Navy itself, the flying part of things.
And he had this really a very sort of successful but truncated career in the Navy. How much do you think he regretted the fact that he had to give up that part of his life?
Well, again, it came over a couple of times interviewing him and how important it was to him. And of course, he helped design the Royal Yacht Britannia, and of course did many, many trips in it, and Her Majesty loved being on board it. His cabin in Britannia had on his desk a model of HMS Magpie, the only ship he commanded. And I think that showed how important that was to him. And when you join the Navy as a sort of seaman officer, what you really want to do is command ships. And I have no doubt at all that he was looking to the future and maybe commanding a destroyer, which he'd done so well in as a first lieutenant. I mean, he was a natural within the Navy. He was an exceptional officer. He was on that sort of gilded route, which was going to take him right up to the top, unless something awful had happened. And he must have known that. And he loved it. And so it was hard for him, but he had such a sense of duty, and I think that's instilled by the Navy, both duty upwards and downwards, and loyalty, that he knew that that was his duty, and he also loved the Queen, and he gave it up. But clearly there was a little pang there, but he never made a big deal about it. But clearly there was a little pang, and he of course created all sorts of other things in the role of supporting Her Majesty. So an exceptional officer who didn't. He was not that fussed with flim-flammery. I mean, I've discovered that he was entitled to the Arctic Star, which was a medal that was introduced a long time after the war for fighting in the Arctic convoys. And I discovered that he was eligible for this. He'd been up to Spitsbergen. And I said to him, you're eligible for this. It's not in your medals. He had so many medal ribbons. And he said, oh, well, I didn't really fight up in the Arctic. He said, I don't think I really deserved that. And he said, it's such a nuisance moving all your medal ribbons around, which I think was so typical of him, I think.
Lord West, can I just ask you about some of his personal qualities? And the sense I'm getting is that those of you who have served either alongside him or those in the same services see something in his training or whatever that corresponds with his personality. And I'm going to use the word blunt here because everyone who's talked about him says he has that ability to be quite blunt, to say things when he wanted to say them. And sometimes, as we know, that endeared him to people, and other times it caused headlines. That's something you recognised in his character?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he did not suffer fools gladly. He didn't like people who were incompetent. He didn't like people talking nonsense. He wanted you to have thought what you're saying, to think things through. And actually, that's very much from our training and being a naval officer. And we are a bit blunt. It's quite hard. Jonathan Band was on before me, and I'm sure you've talked to some other ex-First Sea Lords. Those of us who got towards the top of the Navy, where suddenly we have to be in Whitehall, quite often one puts one's foot in it. I certainly have on lots of occasions, because we are blunt. We call a spade a shovel. And that can be quite hard in the careful political corridors of Whitehall. But actually, it's exactly what you need on a ship on a very, very stormy night in a gale when something goes wrong. And that's very much what he was like. And I think his character was like that as well. And so one knew that was the case. And he was amusing about it. He could certainly make one laugh at times. We were having a lunch on board HMS Ocean when I was First Sea Lord with him there, and he was sitting next to my wife. And sometimes it was lunch for about 40 people. The conversation dies away, things go all quiet, and one heard my wife saying, "You must have such amazing upper body strength." And there was a sort of look of shocked horror everywhere. And the Duke of Edinburgh said, "Well, you've certainly got their attention." They were talking about carriage driving, but he sort of had that sense of humour and bluntness. It was wonderful.
Well, Lord West, really lovely to hear your reminiscences this morning, and thank you very much.
Not at all.
And thank you for being with us here for BBC Breakfast this morning. We are reflecting on the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. And as part of that, hearing from leaders from around the world, both past and present, who've been paying heartfelt tributes to the Duke, praising his life of duty and devotion to the Queen. Those offering their condolences included the King and Queen of Spain, US President Joe Biden, who said the Duke's legacy will live on through all the charitable endeavours he shaped. James Reynolds has this report.
Right from the start of the Queen's reign, Prince Philip was 2 steps behind and sometimes even out of shot. The model clearly worked. The royal couple went on to repeat it in more than 250 foreign trips. There were frequent visits to Canada, where the Queen remains head of state.
Prince Philip was a man of service, motivated by a sense of duty to others. I know that through the Duke of Edinburgh's award, he helped empower millions of young people from all backgrounds, including here in Canada, to realize their greatest potential.
The Duke was remembered in Australia, a country he visited more than 20 times.
Above all, he was a man who was steadfast, who could be relied upon, always standing by his Queen.
The Duke met a number of American presidents. In 2016, at the age of 94, he insisted on driving the Obamas from the helipad to Windsor Castle, making a small piece of history as the oldest ever presidential chauffeur.
He was a heck of a guy. He, his lifetime of service to the United Kingdom and the whole Commonwealth was visible to everybody for a long, long time. I think he's going to be missed, particularly in the United Kingdom. 99 years old, he never slowed down at all, and which I admire the devil out of.
Prince Philip, here with King Felipe of Spain, was related to many of the royal families of Europe. His was a death in the family. Dear Aunt Lilibet, wrote Spain's King and Queen, we are deeply saddened to hear about the passing away of dear Uncle Philip. This is how the news broke in South Africa. The continent is home to Commonwealth and former Commonwealth states.
You know, our heart is being saddened by the death of the prince. But you know, the old man has lived, but it's a great loss. But we just wish the family, you know, our condolences, you know, that they may be comforted.
It is sad, yes, because we've lost a life. But then looking at the age he was, I guess it's a celebratory thing. We need to celebrate the prince's life and no need for crying.
President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe wrote, "My deepest condolences to the people of the United Kingdom and the royal family on the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip. May his soul rest in eternal peace." But it's the islanders of Tanna in the southwest Pacific who may feel the deepest loss of all. Some worship Prince Philip as the reincarnation of an ancient warrior. James Reynolds, BBC News.
Well, let's have a little more of a look around the world and see how the reaction has been. We will be speaking to Yogita Limay, who's in Mumbai. It's Catherine Veerahanga, who is in Kenya for us this morning. Good morning to you, and we'll speak to them in just a moment. First, though, let's go to Shaima Khalil, who's in Sydney, with that wonderful backdrop behind you there, Shaima. There are very strong royal connections, of course, with Australia. Tell us a little bit about the reaction.
Good morning to you. I'm very close to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, where the flag has been flying and lowered at half-mast all day. So too was the flag over the Australian Parliament House, where just a few minutes ago we've also seen a 41-gun salute in honour of the Duke of Edinburgh. We also heard from the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, paying tribute to a life of service and duty and describing Prince Philip's presence and service as a reassurance and a reminder of the stability in a world that can be so uncertain. He also addressed the Queen and said she's been there for us for a long time. Let us now be there for you, Your Majesty. Of course, Prince Philip has had a long and enduring relationship with Australia. He came here in 1940. His military services brought him here. But of course, it was 1954 when he came alongside the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth in that first and historic royal trip, the first by a reigning monarch. And from that time up until 2011 on their last trip, there have been so many highlights. He's touched the lives of so many Australians, of course, with the organizations that he headed, about 50, but also with the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. More than 700,000 young Australians have taken part. But really, it's his character, it's his candor, the fact that he is his own man, that thing that you hear time and time again about bluntness, about the lack of political correctness that gets him in trouble sometimes, that has endeared him so much to so many Australians. He's always been very warmly welcomed here, and he will be fondly remembered, not just by the politicians that he's met and the prime ministers, but also by members of the public.
Shaima, thank you very much. Shaima Khalil reporting from Sydney for us.
Well, from Australia, let's go to India and speak to our correspondent, Yogita Limay, who is in Mumbai. Yogita, just give us a sense of how big a story this has been there where you are.
Well, actually, newspapers here are carrying it on their front pages, and they've recounted his trips to India. There have been 4 in total. We've also seen reactions from leaders in this country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi talking about Prince Philip's distinguished military service. The president of this country saying that he was a long-time admirer and friend of India. But we've also seen tributes from the wider South Asian region, from Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan said Britain had lost a wise elder. Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh has expressed shock and sorrow. And from the city, I mean Mumbai, locked down right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. There's a special set of people who've had, a long relationship with Prince Charles. The lunchbox carriers, a network of men who deliver lunchboxes across the city. They've had a special relationship with Prince Charles since he visited them in 2003. And because of that, they'd actually been to the UK and dined with the royal family, including Prince Philip. And so they've sent out a message of condolence to Prince Charles, to his family, on the loss of his father, on the loss of a husband and a grandfather. And really, this country, he has sort of another link as well, because his maternal uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was the last viceroy of India before it gained independence. So, many links here. He's had 4 trips, greeted very warmly and with a lot of affection. His first trip actually was a solo one, and there are pictures of the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, receiving him at the airport. People had gathered around. They had flower garlands, which they were putting around his necks. And that's what the papers have recounted today, including also a memorable photograph of, the Prince and the Queen in front of the iconic Taj Mahal monument in India.
Thank you very much, Yogita.
So let's go to Catherine, who's in Kenya for us now. Good morning to you, Catherine. It's really interesting, isn't it? We're hearing different countries and leaders talking about their connection to Prince Philip. But where you are in Kenya, there is a very direct connection to an extraordinary moment in the life of Prince Philip and the Queen.
Yes, good morning. I'm speaking to you from treetops in the foothills of Mount Kenya. And now this is a very personal, significant moment for both Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. This is the place where this is the place where Princess Elizabeth actually became queen. The couple had come here on a visit in 1952. They had actually spent the night in a tree house that would have been to the right of me. Now, what transpired over that night is that Princess Elizabeth's father, King George VI, actually passed away, and that's the moment she became queen. Now, when they left here, they didn't know that news, and it wasn't until they got to a royal residence not too far from here that Prince Philip was actually tasked with the duty of having to inform his wife that her father, her beloved father, had passed away and that she was now queen. Now, this is a moment that transformed their lives, both their lives, but also particularly for Prince Philip. He had been a career Navy officer, but now he had to give up that profession and support his wife. So over the years, he took on various roles supporting the Queen. Now, what was also crucial is that the moment that they took on this role leading Great Britain is also the moment that this continent was going through a massive transition. Kenya, where I am, was going through an independence struggle. There was a conflict, and actually the tree house where they were staying was burned down during the fighting. Now, Prince Philip did come back eventually and actually took part in the handover ceremony, but he's been a key historical figure on this continent.
Catherine, thank you very much.
More to come, of course, with your own reflections of your encounters with the Duke of Edinburgh and the impact that, in particular, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme had on your life and the lives of your children and grandchildren, perhaps, as well. That's coming up a bit later on in the programme.
Just coming up to 8:45 on Saturday morning. Not sure what your plans are for the weekend, but Thomas...
Now, as we continue to reflect on the life of the Duke of Edinburgh, alongside his many other charitable interests, Prince Philip will be remembered as one of the first people, actually, in the public eye to champion the cause of conservation.
For nearly 20 years, the Duke was president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, also known then as the WWF, as our Science and Environment editor David Shookman reports.
Nature was one of Prince Philip's great loves, and the need to conserve it became a lifelong passion. He fought not just for endangered species, but for the whole of the natural world.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
From his earliest official visits around the globe, this one to Antarctica, wildlife was always a theme. He used his position to inspire younger generations, In this lecture for 2,000 children, many of the pictures were his.
I don't think I'll tell you which are mine. But if you ever see a very bad one, you'll know.
An emerging theme was our responsibility.
If we as humans have got this power of life and death, not just life and death, but extinction and survival of other species of life, then we ought to exercise it with some sort of moral sense. I mean, why make something extinct if we don't have to?
He authored or contributed to a series of dramatically titled books about threats to nature. And he took advantage of his access to governments the world over. He helped to set up the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and he led it for years. On a visit to the pandas in China, he highlighted the need to save them and their habitats. And he went live on television with David Attenborough to make that point.
The panda range has been squeezed between mountains on one side and human encroachment on the other.
It is important to conservation worldwide. It's been absolutely huge. You can go anywhere in the world, and he will know where you have to make the connection, where you have to put the pressure, what you have to do. And he's very practical in those terms.
But he didn't always help himself.
There was the tiger.
In the 60s, he joined tiger hunts, and he once shot a tiger in India. This image was to remain controversial. It was later said that tigers weren't considered endangered. But Prince Philip did have his own distinct views. He supported fox hunting and the shooting of game birds, which set him at odds with many environmentalists.
There is an advantage in people wanting to shoot, because if you have a game species, you want it to survive because you want to have some more next year. It's exactly like a farmer. You want to crop it. You don't want to exterminate it.
So this was a man with his own brand of environmental concern. And he did not like being labelled.
Would you describe yourself as a green? As green?
No.
Why not?
Well, because I think that there's a difference between being concerned for the conservation of nature and being a bunny hugger. When I was president of WWF, I got more letters about people, the way animals were treated in zoos, than about any concern for the survival of a species. But people can't get their heads around the idea of a species surviving.
And as far back as 1970, with a young Prince Charles by his side, he was typically forthright about the need to be realistic in the fight for nature.
After all, even naturalists drive cars occasionally. And having accepted that, we must go a step further and recognize that compromises have to be reached. Disagreement is inevitable, but the groups must go on meeting, because we have simply got to hammer out answers to problems which are going to affect all life in these islands for generations to come.
In many ways, Prince Philip was ahead of his time, using his fame as a royal to raise awareness of conservation. An early environmentalist who did not want to be called that, a unique campaigner for a cause that's ever more relevant. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, joining us now is Tanya Steele, who is the Chief Executive of WWF UK, and also Martin Palmer, conservationist and great friend of the Duke of Edinburgh. Thank you, both of you, so much for talking to us this morning. And Tanya, I was struck by one particular quote attributed to the Duke, in which he was saying, and this is back in 1970, so way before concern about the environment was part of the public discourse in such a big way. He was saying back then, it's totally useless for a lot of well-meaning people to wring their hands and point out the dangers of pollution or the destruction of the countryside if no one is willing or capable of taking any action. How far ahead of the game was he at the time in raising these issues?
I mean, there's no doubt that the Duke of Edinburgh was a visionary conservationist. He was ahead of his time and he followed the science very closely. And he certainly used his position both to raise the issue, speak powerfully, but he was a man of action and he really was determined to ensure that there was action to both conserve species, but actually conserve our whole natural world, on which we all know we rely for so very, very much.
But he did have a love of game shooting. He once shot a tiger while on tour in India. Did those things sit at odds with his approach to conservation and protection of wildlife?
I mean, I think in 2021 today, photographs like that feel very out of place to us. But what we do know is that the Duke did focus his efforts very resolutely from the end of 1961, when he was one of the founders of the World Wildlife Fund. And he focused his efforts both on conserving species, but actually ensuring that we tightened environmental laws, that we created natural reserves so that it could be protected for future generations. His commitment was unflinching throughout.
Martin, very good morning to you. I know the crossover point for you with Prince Philip was conservation, but my thought, speaking to you first up, is that I think you've described him as a mate. He was a friend of yours, wasn't he?
He was. For 36 years, I was his religious advisor on the environment. I was working with him in January when we did a special Sunday morning service for Radio 4. And my particular link to him, and good morning, Tanya, lovely to see you, was that he launched he brought together for the first time in history the heads of all the major religions with all the major environmental conservation organizations in 1986 and asked me to coordinate that because he felt that whilst the science was vital, we were never going to change hearts and minds by data. Nobody was ever converted by a pie chart. They are changed by stories. They are changed by beliefs, by values. And he saw that the faiths were the largest value-driven communities in the world. And he helped launch what has become now the largest civil society movement in the world, the involvement of the faiths in the environment. And as Tanya said, he was visionary. Nobody else thought that. And in fact, many within WWF at that time thought he was bonkers and did everything they could to sort of say, no, we don't want to be working with religions. That's not scientific. And I think the partnership that Tanya and I have in that we've helped create the Beliefs and Values program in WWF worldwide has shown that his vision in 1985, when he first raised it with me, has now become standard wisdom. And I think that's one of his greatest gifts.
Martin, one of the things we're very much enjoying this morning on Breakfast is a little reflection. And part of this is personal reflections. And quite a few people have been talking to us about his manner, his way of going about business, which I think everyone acknowledges was very much his own. What can you share with us in terms of occasions when you were with him and just how he was?
Well, the major issue he had to deal with was that, imagine, Charlie, this is your 1,000th person you've greeted this week. And I've watched some of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with meet him and turn into rabbits in the headlights and end up with sort of monosyllabic, yes, no, yes. And so sometimes, what are called his gaffes were just attempts to actually get people to open up. And one of my favorites was when I introduced him to a group of very, very earnest Americans who ran a thing called the Global Awareness Program. And he said, global awareness. Oh, good. When were you aware that it was a globe and not flat? And it's just a complete look of incomprehension. And what I often had to do was to then say, that was a joke, don't you? And then they go, oh, right. But also, I've got to know him very, very personally, and he could be extremely funny. We did one event in DC where, again, I took in two people who'd done an amazing job organizing the event. And I said, look, we've got a gap between the official reception and the dinner. I need to talk to him about things, but come and join us. Let's have 10 minutes just with him. So I brought them in and I said, Your Royal Highness, this couple have done this amazing planning event. And he went, wonderful, wonderful. And he asked them some questions and they went monosyllabic. And so I kind of nudged the husband of this couple. And I said, come on, just say something, for goodness sake. And he said, it must be wonderful working with Martin Palmer. And Prince Philip went, no, not really. In fact, not at all, really. No, he's a complete nuisance. In fact, it's rather like working with an octopus. I said, I beg your pardon? Like an octopus? He said, yes, you spot this tentacle coming towards you, and it's the other 7 from behind that grab you. So if he was comfortable, he was very funny and very jolly, but also he was immensely loyal. And he expected loyalty in return. He also expected that you would not kowtow If you didn't agree with him, and I didn't agree on a number of things, then he would want a jolly good argument.
And on that subject, if I know that you've spoken about the fact that you actually cleared the entire deck of a ship because of one of your enormous rows, which was about monasticism. I'm fascinated to know what was the point of disagreement there. Can you remember even?
Yes, I can. We've just been on Mount Athos, which is this extraordinary peninsula in northern Greece, which is only inhabited by monks, and no women have been on there since the year 1054. But it is an amazing nature reserve. And we'd had an extraordinary time there, staying with the monks, walking the mountains, very quiet, a time when he needed to be on pilgrimage and on retreat. But we were coming off, and he was saying, oh, it's all very well, all this monasticism, but, aren't they running away from the world? And I was arguing back and saying, no, what they're doing is they're showing a different way of being in the world. And we had because, of course, he was brought up Orthodox. He was brought up as an Orthodox Christian, and that fed that sense of a great divine power that had created the planet, perfectly at ease with evolution, as most Christians are. That great sense of God as the creator, but also the Orthodox tradition that we're here as servants. So I was arguing back, no, what they are doing is they are reminding us of simplicity. And he was going, yes, but who can manage this kind of simplicity? It was about 5 a.m, and with all due respect to him, he never was great first thing in the morning. So if I was going to introduce him to people before about 10 o'clock in the morning, I would say, now, if I say to you, Your Royal Highness, this is Mr. So-and-so, that means he's in a bad mood. If I say, sir, this is Mr. So-and-so, he's in a good mood. So we had our codes, we had our ways, but he really was a great mate.
Martin, it's lovely hearing your stories. Tanya, can I go to you? I'm just mindful of when Fiona Bruce asked him that question in that interview. We saw a clip just a moment ago. I hope you heard it. Would you describe yourself as a Green? And I suppose in a way his reaction to that shows how things have changed over the years, that now, there are campaigns, there are names for people who believe in certain things. It wasn't something that he really recognised, understood the issues clearly, but there is a change that's happened during his lifetime.
Unquestionably, and this is where the Duke of Edinburgh was a pioneer. He famously said, if nature doesn't survive, then neither will man. He really could see, as an internationalist and someone who had travelled globally, he had seen firsthand the sheer scale of the destruction. And he certainly saw that more in both the founding of WWF and over 50 international trips that he carried out with the fund. He was really determined to ensure that he put this both on world leader agendas, but also to educate the public as well. He was passionate about ensuring that we could preserve the world for future generations to come. I mean, in the 1960s, when WWF was formed, 62% of our planet was wilderness. Today, that's closer to 35%. And he understood more than most how dependent we are on the natural world. And really, our job is to ensure that we continue that legacy, and we do continue to ensure that we can maintain that balance with nature and actually start to restore it for the future as well.
And you would think he would be very happy hearing you talking about it this morning, Tanya, in the light of everything that's happened. Thank you so much. Tanya Steele, Chief Executive of WWF UK, and our thanks as well to Martin Palmer, conservationist and great friend of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burton and Charlie Stayt.
Our headlines today. Gun salutes will take place across the UK to mark the death of the Duke of Edinburgh at the age of 99.
Details about the Duke's funeral are due to be released later as the royal family mourns the loss of a beloved husband and father.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as an individual in his own right, really.
The man and his legacy. This morning on Breakfast, we'll speak to the personal friends of the Duke and those whose lives he touched.
Those gun salutes will be in tribute not only to his years of public service, but also his military career. There will be guns fired here at Portsmouth Naval Base.
Good morning, it's Saturday the 10th of April. The armed forces will lead a second day of tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, who died yesterday, aged 99, with gun salutes across the UK, in Gibraltar and from warships at sea.
Details of his funeral are also expected to be announced later. Prince Philip was a constant support to the Queen during more than 70 years of marriage.
On Breakfast this morning, we're reflecting on his life with some of those who knew him well and looking at how his legacy will live on.
First, though, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has this report.
Windsor Castle, where the Duke spent much of the past year in isolation with the Queen, where he died yesterday morning, and where it's expected his funeral will take place in St George's Chapel in about a week from now. Further details of the arrangements are expected to be given by Buckingham Palace later today. The Duke's death will be a grievous loss for the Queen after their 73 years of marriage. Last night on a BBC programme, their eldest children paid tribute to him.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
It was in August 2017 on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that the Duke carried out his final solo engagement, inspecting a parade by the Royal Marines. It was pouring with rain, yet the Duke, who was then 96, was not to be deterred. Duty came first that day, as it had for so many decades, so often alongside the Queen, but also pursuing his own public programme, to which he brought his own famously forthright style. But the public image of the Duke walking a few paces behind his wife only tells part of the story. His greatest contribution was the unseen support he gave to the Queen as she coped with the often solitary role of head of state. Occasionally, she alluded to it. "He is my constant strength and guide," she said during the Diamond Jubilee. He was the one person she could always turn to. Just before his 90th birthday, the Duke had said in a BBC interview that he felt it was time to wind down.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say.
Yet it wasn't until 6 years later and that parade in the pouring rain on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that there was any real evidence that he was retiring. Now the Queen must continue without him. The world will pay its tributes to a man of strong personality who made a significant contribution to the nation's life. And his family will mourn a much-loved father, grandfather, great-grandfather and husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
So we're joined now from outside at Windsor Castle by our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell. Very good morning to you, Sarah. So, of course, Windsor Castle will be the focus of what happens in the days ahead. Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, indeed. Good morning to you, Charlie. Really, things starting to sort of wake up, people starting to come along and stand here in front of the gates. I think as they did yesterday, I was at Buckingham Palace and just sort of wanting to take in the atmosphere a little bit. The household cavalry, they performed their own tribute. They were out exercising the horses just in the last hour, and they stopped and they lined up just opposite the castle walls and they observed a 2-minute silence. There'll be further military tributes, the official military tributes later on today with the death gun salute. Those will happen at midday. There'll be a 41 round fired. That's one every minute for 40 minutes, and they'll be fired in cities across the UK, in Gibraltar, and on ships at sea. And these are, it's traditional at big royal events and happenings for this to happen. But I think particularly poignant today, bearing in mind Prince Philip's strong association, strong links with the armed forces. Now, the Queen, we know by the royal standard flying above the castle here, the Queen is at Windsor Castle, as she has been for much of the last year, of course, spending her time in lockdown with Prince Philip. And since that news was announced just after midday yesterday of the passing of her husband of 73 years, one of the things that she will be having to think about will be the funeral arrangements. Of course, there have been funeral plans in place for many years. Prince Philip was a very important public figure, but they will have to be altered due to the COVID restrictions to avoid large gatherings of people. And when those plans have been approved by the Queen, when they've been signed off by her, they will be made public, and we're expecting to hear further detail about that later today.
Sarah, thank you.
Edinburgh Castle will be one of the landmarks across the UK that will hold a 41-gun salute to honour Prince Philip later today. The Duke had a long and close association with Scotland, beginning with his years at Gordonston School. And we're joined by our Scotland correspondent, Alexandra Mackenzie. Just outside Holyrood, Alexandra, what's happening there at the moment?
Yes, I'm just at the gates of Holyrood Palace, the official residence for the royal family when they're in Scotland. It's just at the bottom of the Royal Mile. At the other end of the Royal Mile, we have Edinburgh Castle, where that gun salute will take place at midday. It is fairly quiet here today, as you can see. There were a few flowers laid at the gates yesterday, but they've been removed. People are being discouraged from gathering here and are being advised to pay their respects in other ways. But the flag has been lowered here, as it has across at the Scottish Parliament, which is just a few steps from here. And the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, she led the tributes, and she's expressed her deepest sympathy on behalf of herself, but also on behalf of the people of Scotland, to Her Majesty the Queen and to the rest of the royal family. And she said that the Duke of Edinburgh had a deep and long-standing ties with Scotland. Now, and the Scottish Parliament is not meeting at the moment because we are in the middle of an election campaign here at the moment, but all that has now been set aside and Parliament has been recalled for Monday for other politicians to also pay their respects. Now, the Duke of Edinburgh was one of the first pupils at Gordonston when it opened in the 1930s. He excelled in sport particularly, and the principal of Gordonston, Lisa Kerr, she has paid respects and said the Gordonston community joined together to convey their condolences. She said he was supportive of pupils fulfilling academic potential, but also in developing life skills.
Alexandra, thank you very much.
There are some practical political implications from the Duke of Edinburgh's death. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's in Downing Street for us now. This includes, of course, suspension of campaigning for the 6th of May elections. Tell us a little more.
Well, yes, it does. First off, there's going to be a special sitting of Parliament on Monday. They're coming back a bit earlier than planned, MPs, in order to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. So there'll be a special debate which will run from 2:30 on Monday. The Prime Minister will lead the tribute, Sir Keir Starmer will respond, and then individual MPs will be able to pay their own tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh. It's expected that is going to run for several hours until about 10 o'clock on Monday night. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, says that he expects it to be a day of sadness, of fond memories, as well as one thing Prince Philip did have, humour. Now, of course, many MPs and politicians from all political parties have already expressed their condolences and they've talked warmly about the Duke of Edinburgh's work. Yesterday, when the Cabinet met, ministers discussed their recollections of meeting Prince Philip. They praised his work as an environmentalist and for setting up the Duke of Edinburgh Award for young people. So those sort of informal tributes, if you like, have been paid. What Monday will do is give MPs the chance to formally pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh and recognise the work of a man who, while he didn't have a formal constitutional role, had a huge impact on public life in the UK over 7 decades. After that, the Commons will return to business as usual from Tuesday onwards, but it's not going to be quite politics as usual. As you mentioned, campaigning in elections that are happening on the 6th of May has been suspended. So that is the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senedd, for many local councils in England and for police and crime commissioners across England and Wales. Campaigning for those elections has been suspended, and a lot of government activity will change. You'll see it be a bit more muted in the next few days. So while government business is continuing and we might get announcements on things like, important public messages on coronavirus. There won't be any change to the easing of lockdown restrictions in England. What we're not going to see are things like ministerial visits, ministers touring the TV studios, any other major government announcements or anything that's routine. All of those things will go on hold for a few days as Westminster joins the rest of the country, really, and the world in just pausing to reflect.
Helen, thank you.
And thank you for your reflections as well. I'll just read one briefly here. A lot of people who've done the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme and the impact it had on their life. Ruth says this: I went to Gordonston and throughout my life have volunteered in some regard. 2 years ago, set up my own company, teaching children how to cook for the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. Last year, I won a Bread Hero Award for my volunteering and baking bread for my community. But this was all influenced by the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, helping others. He's been a huge influence on my life and I am profoundly thankful. Thank you, Ruth, for getting in touch with us about that.
What an excellent idea to get an award for baking bread. Approve of that, absolutely.
Gold star from me.
Let's have a look at the weather. It's just come out.
Well, this morning we are looking at many different aspects of the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. And one thing he's been praised for is his sense of duty and service, and also for being the longest serving royal consort in British history at the Queen's side for more than 70 years.
So let's take a little look back at some of the key moments. Prince Philip had served in the Royal Navy, becoming the youngest first lieutenant before taking on royal duties full-time when his wife became Queen. That was 1952.
He was the Queen's closest advisor, responsible for modernising aspects of royal life and making the family more accessible and less formal in its ways.
The Duke supported hundreds of charities campaigning for nature conservation and promoting leadership and encouraging young people to test themselves in the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme.
During his life, he maintained a close bond with the armed services, especially the Royal Navy, and encouraged his children and grandchildren to serve as he had done.
Prince Philip was known for his outspoken style, sometimes controversial wit, and could be relied on to speak his mind even on difficult issues. With his death, the royal household has lost a dominant figure. The Queen has lost a husband, and British public life has lost a powerful presence, a man whose momentous life story spanned a century.
Well, we're going to speak to one person who knew the Duke well over the years. That's the adventurer, Sir David Templeman-Adams. Good morning to you, Sir David. When did you first come into contact then with the Duke?
Well, I started the award when I was 13, so I carried on and went on to do my gold, and I received that at Buckingham Palace. So a very young boy, he landed on the lawns in a helicopter, so I thought that was brilliant. And he came in, and I eventually did more and more adventures, and he was a patron to a lot of them, so I met him quite on a lot of occasions.
Did he ever
and then he
remember...
was a patron to...
I'm so sorry. I was just going to ask, did he ever remember that first encounter with you? Because he obviously meets hundreds of thousands of award winners, doesn't he, every year, or did do?
He did, actually, that, yes. No, I don't think I never asked him that question, actually, but you're quite right. He never missed a Gold Award presentation in all the years that he used to present them. So his idea, if somebody had finished the Gold Award, they had to get it from one of the palaces. And, he kept that going until he formally retired. But he was a patron to several of my expeditions, and I used to see him privately. And
yeah.
he was a very highly intelligent man, and he would ask some pretty searching questions along the way. And I think that's something I don't think he gets more credit for, that he had great knowledge. He saw lots of things around the world, and not just adventure, but all aspects of life. He had great knowledge of it.
Yeah, those questions that you refer to, what kind of things did he want to know? Because he was very interested, very often, wasn't he, in the sort of technical aspect of expeditions and the science around them?
Well, as we all know, he was a pilot. He flew lots of different planes, so he was always interested in up-to-date navigation and communications and how that changed. And if you can imagine how that's changed in his lifetime, going from Morse code on ships and in airplanes all the way to satellite navigation, instead of going from sextants to GPSs. So he really saw massive change in his life, and always very, very interested. And of course, when he used to go to these places, he used to see scientists right at the forefront of this technology. So he had a really insight into all of this way before the general public, such as myself. And I remember going again to his library, and he said, "Have you seen this?" Which I hadn't, and it was something about navigation, which I just thought, this is, quite amazing.
Well, I'm really pleased that we can speak to Giles Brandreth now. Morning to you, Giles.
Morning. Good to be with you.
Well, lovely to see you. Now, one of the delights on breakfast this morning is we've spoken to quite a few people who know him well. Some people claim to have met him, they've met him once. You're one of those who's had a connection over a period of time in lots of different circumstances. I wonder what kind of insight can you give us, maybe into just what he was like, and maybe a little bit more about his relationship with the Queen. We've seen there are some lovely pictures being shared of them, different points in their lives. Just tell us a little bit about what you learned over the years.
Well, there's been a lot of quoting of the speech that the Queen made, where she talked about him being her strength and stay all these years, which certainly was true. But I think what I remember most vividly about the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh together is the way he made her laugh. He was a very funny man, and he made it a policy. Your previous speaker was talking about the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, and he would go along to these events. And the last time I saw him in action there, he was in his mid-90s. It was the last gold one that he did. He came age 90, mid-90s. He ran onto the podium and jumped up onto the podium. He was full of energy, and he cracked a joke. And he was a very funny individual. And I often saw him making the Queen laugh. And I think she will miss that so much. I remember once during one of the Jubilees, I was going on a tour with them, and I was in the car behind theirs. And they'd been out on a long day together. And it was the end of the day, and they were driving home. And I was in the car behind theirs. And as they stepped into the car, the Queen clearly asked the Duke of Edinburgh something. And he began telling her a story. And he made her laugh for 20 minutes continuously. I just watched this. She just fell about laughing as he told his story. He was a very human individual, and he was completely unstuffy. He was the same with everybody, and he just responded to his mood. I mean, some days he could be a bit cantankerous. Some days he could be a bit alarming. Other days he was very jolly. You just took him as you found him. He was himself. He gave me a little useful trick when I became a member of Parliament. He said, "You're going to meet lots of people who will remember you, but you won't remember them." And bear in mind, he did 22,000 solo engagements, literally met thousands of people. A YouGov poll has just suggested that 22% of the population have a record of meeting Prince Philip in person or seeing him in person. So he got about. So he said, what you have to say to people is, what's keeping you busy these days? Because it's a good question if you've never met them before. And if you have met them before, it implies that you remember and you're asking what they're doing now. What's keeping you busy these days?
Do you know, I'm making a note of that. Even as you're speaking now, Giles, I am making a note of that too. Can I just ask you as well, on that theme, that his manner, quite a few people who we've spoken to this morning have said when you knew him well or knew him a bit, you knew his sense of humour. And there have been other occasions, and I think we can all be honest about this, when those things have been either taken or considered differently. You know, comments he's made and they've not reflected so well. There has always been that air around, hasn't there?
And he dreaded this. I mean, he was totally conscious of it. I interviewed him formally once, and he said, what are we going to talk about? These gaffes, undiplomatic on tour? Oh, God. And he told me that eventually he became so notorious as the gaff man. When he went on a foreign trip, he dreaded it if the British press were going to be there. He said, they're going to wait. They're going to report nothing. They're going to wait for 5 days until I drop a clanger, and that'll be the story. And he said to me, the reason this happens is that I meet so many people, and it's very formal when you meet royalty. There's awkwardness in the air. And he said, and I try and break the ice. And, you know, I go down the receiving line, and I try to make at least one person laugh. And, you know, if you do that day in, day out over 70 years, now and again, you'll pick a wrong one and you'll say something that people don't realize is meant in an amusing way. So that was the cause of the gaffes. But he did regret that. He didn't want to upset people. He actually, you know, I said to him, you know, you've got a reputation for not suffering fools gladly. And I said, but I think you actually have suffered fools. And he said, oh, God, I feel I have. What did frustrate him, though, was when he was surrounded by pomposity and people being very formal. He would go to visit a factory and he'd hate it if he was just confined to meeting the chairman or the managing director. He'd break away from that and try and meet the real people. I remember going to a charity event with him once in London, and we came down the back stairs to go to find his car. And he said, what's this room here? And I said, I think that's the kitchen. He said, oh, it was a great lunch, wasn't it? Anyway, he pushed open the door to the kitchen, went into the kitchen and went round individually and thanked all the people who'd made the lunch, and then said, where are the real workers, the people doing the washing up? Where are they? And he found the place where the people were doing the washing up, and he thanked them for what they had done. And then we slipped out into the street, and there were just two people, his equerry and his security person, got into the car, and off he went.
It is, as you say, there is a kind of a way that you learn to deal with those public situations. I don't think any of us can really imagine what it's like with that as our primary role, to just go out and meet people and talk to them and try and put them at ease when you might be feeling at your most kind of nervous and apprehensive.
The challenge of his life really was trying to combine the two jobs, because he knew that part of it was just to be seen, to go around shaking hands, being jolly, being enthusiastic, being supportive. But that ultimately is not deeply satisfying, particularly if we're going to do it literally over 70 years. And that's why he got stuck into certain particular causes. I got to know him through the National Playing Fields Association, now known as Fields in Trust. It protects and creates playing spaces, sports facilities for young people, for play areas, for disabled children, that sort of thing. And he actually, when I turned up, I found him sitting in the office. He actually ran it on a day-to-day basis. So there were some things like the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, like Outward Bound, where he really got stuck in. And then on top of that, he did all the other things, and there were more than 800 organizations in which he was actively involved, where he did more just the ceremonial stuff. But even then, he did it with a great sense of humor. I remember once being at a function at Buckingham Palace for our charity, the Playing Fields Association, and I said to him, sir, I think you're running behind schedule. He said, I know I am. I'm going to the clockmakers next, and I always like to arrive a little late for them.
Giles, I can't claim any connections like you have with the Duke of Edinburgh, but I did once do one of those events you were alluding to earlier, Buckingham Palace and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, one of these fantastic young people, there's thousands of them. It was boiling hot, and we all went out in the garden, the Buckingham Palace garden, but before the event, you're inside, and there's this frisson of excitement when the Duke of Edinburgh, you'll know this, won't you, Giles? There's a kind of frisson of excitement when he comes in the room. And he walks in and he's introduced to the presenters. I was one of those. And the person who was with him said, this is Charlie Stayt, the presenter of BBC Breakfast. And he looks at you very intently. Well, I don't know that. I'm not going to claim that one. But he has a twinkle in his eye and he's thinking, what's he going to say next? And he said, what time do you have to get up? Quite a good question. Get that question a lot. I said about 4 a.m. And he thought again, and he's looking straight at me, and he said, well, what do you want to do that for? which left me I was completely stumped, because it's actually quite a good question, really. And
sometimes it's a direct question.
A very direct question. And I stood there just kind of looking at him for a bit, and then he moved down the line, and I realised, what you realise, and you'll know this very well, Giles, is often you'll see that sort of ripple as he goes down the line chatting with people, and they're left, either laughing or just kind of slightly surprised by the encounter. And I know that's just one little moment in time, but I got a sense of what you were talking about earlier on.
He lived in the moment. I mean, that's a perfect example of him actually being there, being present with you and being interested in you. What he did as a person, he leant forward all the time and asked questions. He was always inquiring. The two words that seemed to come out of his mouth most often in my experience were, yes, but. Whatever you said, he was going to contradict it in some way. He was engaged in the conversation with you. And I think he was aware, too, that there was a big difference between him and the Queen. The Queen, when you meet the Queen, it's the Queen. And the Queen can just be, it's just her presence is enough. It is the Queen. And there's a kind of invisible moat around her. But he knew that it was different with him. He was just the Duke of Edinburgh. So he felt he had to go down the line, breaking the ice, trying to make people laugh. But he didn't take it for himself. He told me, and this is quite interesting, he told me that in 1953-54, after the coronation, they went on a tour to Australia. And millions of people, literally more than 1 million people, turned out in the streets to greet him and the Queen. And he told me that he watched the Queen with these people, 1 million people cheering her. And he realized that the Queen was totally the same with one person or with 1 million people. And he learned from that, he said, that it's not about us as individuals, it's about the role we're fulfilling, and it's about the people out there. And he said, my rule is don't talk about yourself, talk about other people. Nobody's interested in you, talk about the other person. And he always did that. He always engaged you on every occasion.
Giles, thank you so much. It's been really lovely to hear some of those reflections this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's see, time now is 9:31. Of the many considerable achievements over Prince Philip's career and time, one of the most internationally commended was, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. We've been talking about that quite a bit this morning.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, designed as a programme of activities for young people to build confidence and hone life skills.
And when you look at the numbers, you really do understand the impact it's had. More than 3 million awards have been won by young people in the UK alone since the scheme was first introduced. That was in 1956.
The programme has been adopted by 130 countries.
And in his lifetime, the Duke attended more than 500 Gold Award ceremonies in the UK.
And thank you very much for your reflections on this morning as well, getting in touch to tell us about how the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme changed your life. Jane says, I did my bronze, silver and gold award. I made lifelong friends, shared in lots of laughter. It's given me a lifelong love of hill walking from the expeditions we took on. An amazing experience to be there at Holyrood, meeting the Duke of Edinburgh. He came around all the groups to speak. And it was Craig Brown who presented our award, but the Duke stood and spoke to my mum, says Jane.
There you go. Let's speak to Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson, Duke of Edinburgh Awards Chair of Trustees. Good morning to you. And Peter Kay, who is CEO of Australia's arm of the scheme, joining us from Sydney Harbour with Sarah, who takes part in the Australian Award programme. Very good morning to all of you. Tanny, maybe you can start us off. This scheme has had such a huge impact and carries on having that impact now.
Absolutely. At any one point, we've got 490,000 young people taking part in the award. And it's relevant now as it was 65 years ago. I mean, if you were starting with a blank piece of paper, you would want young people to learn a skill and to do volunteering and do something that challenged it. So it's incredible. Although the things that young people do underneath those strands have changed, it still holds incredibly true, and it's been amazing. Really quite humbling listening to all the stories of the impact it has. You know, we know it from talking to young people, but that sort of outpouring of emotion about the awards has been incredible.
Yeah, I was perhaps surprised earlier when we spoke to Hannah Cockcroft, Tanny, and she was saying, yeah, doing this award basically drove my career into racing and becoming this hugely successful Paralympian. And it is about all abilities, crossing all boundaries, isn't it?
It is. And it's about young people challenging themselves, because to do the award, yes, you could maybe do something you're already doing or something that you like doing, but you have to push your boundaries. And it's as much about young people finding out what they don't like doing as what they do like doing. A lot of the young people we talk to, I mean, over all the years have said, it's friendship, it's fun, it's challenge, it's learning to make decisions. You know, the expedition is a big part of that, which a lot of people talk about, because there's a lot of shared experience in those moments. But, you know, what we fundamentally believe, I mean, especially during COVID, which has been horrible, and GCSEs and A-levels being cancelled, and this is a big, you know, percentage of young people's life. The award is there as the constant. The figures for young people signing up during this time have been amazing. And whether young people are going on to college, to university, to work, the fact that people know what it takes to do the award is something that is really important for young people, especially right now.
Well, let's talk to Peter Kay, CEO of the Duke of Edinburgh International Award in Australia. And with the greatest respect, Peter, much more importantly, let's speak to Sarah, who is one of those who's involved in the scheme right now and actually doing one of the awards. Sarah, just explain to us a little bit about what it is you're doing and why it's such an important scheme.
So for the Duke of Edinburgh, for my bronze, I did some volunteering in disability, and I undertook some sports and learnt some new skills such as driving. And for my silver, I did a whole bunch of other things, and I did, I think, about 100-kilometre kayaking experience, or probably more than that. And it was really an award that kind of pushed me and challenged me and really fostered my love of social justice and wanting to support and advocate for people and really pushing myself in that. And now I do my placement, my student placement in a major tertiary hospital in Sydney for social work. So I think the Duke of Edinburgh Award really catapulted that for me. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really good to hear, isn't it, Peter? I know the point here, in a way, is that this scheme set up so long ago, in the late 50s, wasn't it? Is still relevant now.
100%, yeah, and I think it's adaptable in different ways as well. So it's never stagnant in a way, because you make those skills or the active activity or, you know, or even the adventurous activity, you make it your own. It's not necessarily a scheme where it's like, this is what you have to do, go and do it. It's you pick the thing that you want to do, and that's gonna, and you're always encouraged to do something that you've never done or you don't know how to do. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's really something that really pushes your boundaries.
Do you know what I think we're seeing, Peter, is we're seeing right now the confidence it gives young people, because Sarah's done all the talking. Anything you'd like to say, Peter?
And that's how it should be. Look, I got involved with the program back in the 70s and literally fell in love with it. It's exactly what Sarah said. Suddenly there's something there where you can express yourself, and then the wider community recognises it. And if Prince Philip was sitting around the table now designing the Duke of Edinburgh Award, he would be talking about making sure that this thing was designed in open architecture, that it remained fluid, it remained flexible, and that it could be adapted to any situation, culture, environment. Because back in the 56, that was not what the community expected. They wanted programming, they wanted curriculum, they wanted set activity. So he was showing leadership that was possibly 20, 30 years ahead of his time. And I'm in awe of that. And this is why, as Sarah said, the award program will just keep supporting future generations, because it's impossible to date. It doesn't come with prescribed activities. So each generation uses it to their benefit, reflecting the values and the interests that are within their community.
Tanni, I wonder if perhaps we need this scheme, or our children need this scheme more than ever after the year or so that we've had, and there's been a huge focus on children's mental health and catching up with the curriculum. But actually, this kind of activity could do more for sort of confidence, resilience, creative thinking than anything sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge percentage of young people's lives, and they've been out of school for a really long time. I mean, what's been amazing is the number of schools that and other voluntary organisations who've kept going. I mean, it's a massive thank you to the tens of thousands of volunteers who work to support young people. And, you know, the numbers signing up for this academic year have been incredible as well. So I think young people do, you know, absolutely see it as something that adds value and is really important to them. And it's, you know, for a charity to have been going for 65 years and to be growing sort of pretty much year on year, just is very exciting. You know, although we're in a very sad time at the moment, it's a massive testament to the legacy of the Duke of Edinburgh that he had the foresight to think about this, and that it's still relevant today for young people.
Tanni, thank you so much. Dame Tanni Gray-Thompson, thank you very much for talking to us this morning. And also many thanks to Peter Kay, CEO of the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme in Australia, and to his daughter Sarah as well. We really appreciate it. And thank you to those who've been in touch this morning to talk about the long-term impact the award has had on their lives. Barbara says, I completed my Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award 1974. It inspired my life in many ways, introducing me to camping and hiking in the mountains, which I continued all through my lifetime, also helped me to get a job, as employers looked on it almost like a qualification, as it proved you had determination of character to complete. At 64, it is still one of my proudest achievements.
There we go. Let's bring it right up to date now. Teenagers in the UK right now are taking part. Hibba and Anam, let's say good morning to them, who volunteered at a food bank, part of their Bronze Awards scheme. Very good morning to you both. Hibba, first of all, tell us a little bit about what it is you're doing. Tell us about the scheme.
Okay, so good morning everyone. Today for our Duke of Edinburgh Award we were doing volunteering, skills and physical activities, and they all go towards a CV application, and we can put that on our CV and it becomes more employable.
And Anam, just give us an idea of why you felt you needed to do this or wanted to do it.
Good morning. I feel like I had to do this because it was something that helped me to gain life skills in the future, and it was something that opened a lot of doors for me. It helped me get out of my comfort zone and gave me different skills I didn't even have in the first place. It helped to gain my confidence, give me responsibility, and also helped me to become more independent as an individual.
And Alan, did you know who the Duke of Edinburgh was, or his connection with this particular scheme, its history at all?
To be honest, when I started, I didn't actually know much of the history behind it. But as I continue to learn and I continue to carry on in this award, I learned a lot about it and exactly like why it was put into place. It's been a really, really good opportunity to get into, as it's provided me with so many skills that I didn't know I was capable of. It's given me, it's helped me to outshine myself and give me a good opportunity to enhance my own reputation and help me with other things that I didn't know how to do.
And Hibba, I'm interested, Rachel was asking that question about what you knew about the Duke of Edinburgh himself. I mean, different generations obviously grown up with him, being very much part of their lives. What did you know about him?
I know that he was very important and he did a lot of good things by setting up the award, and also if you went on to do your silver and then your gold, he would actually come to certain award ceremonies. So I want to do my gold in the future as well.
Yeah, and just tell us, I'm interested in what's going on behind you, because I think you explained a little bit about the programme, but tell us what the guys are doing behind you there.
Yeah, they're setting up for the food bank, especially our school, we really enjoy sending food to the to people who are homeless, the poor people. It's just a way of giving back to the community as well.
And do you have your expedition planned for your Bronze Award? Do you know where you're going to go or what you'll be doing?
So hopefully in the future, with the restrictions being uplifted, hopefully we can go on our expedition. It was cancelled this year, but hopefully we'll go in the future.
Oh, well, I wish you loads of luck in the future, and I hope you do get out there, because it is one of the most, I suppose, memorable parts of the whole award scheme. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Can I just say as well to both of you, you gave us the most enthusiastic good morning of the morning. So that's been a lift for everyone.
Yeah, no one else is normally that happy to speak to us, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see, 9:44 is the time.
We're going to just, for a few moments now, the next few moments, reflect on the Duke of Edinburgh's military career, seen as a hugely important influence on his character as well. Our reporter John Maguire has been in Portsmouth this morning, which is where the Duke completed some of his early training. And no doubt, John, they are marking the passing of the Duke there where you are.
Yes, they are, Rachel. They will take part in this 41-gun salute, the military's way of paying tribute, not only to Prince Philip's decades and decades of public service through his royal duties, but also honouring his military career as well. And we'll hear a lot more about that in just a couple of minutes. You can probably just about make out in the distance there the two new aircraft carriers, one named Queen Elizabeth, one named Prince of Wales, so obviously named after the Duke's wife and eldest son, respectively. One of the other things that Prince Philip did, to an extraordinary extent actually, when you add up the thousands and tens of thousands of visits he did, was to go on royal visits, open certain events. He always made a joke about he was the world's most qualified curtain puller for opening up the plaques, the foundation stones and things like that at buildings, but also just going and seeing people, perhaps even in their daily lives, in their place of work. And as I've been finding out, when he went to meet those people, it was certainly an unforgettable day.
To perform thousands upon thousands of royal visits is their duty, their job. But to make each one feel so special to the people they meet, that is an art form.
The aura just filled the old factory. The Queen, very petite, small lady, but as I said, the aura that she gives off, it was an unbelievable experience.
During the Diamond Jubilee tour of 2012, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh visited the Bailey Caravans factory in Bristol.
The Duke was very interested on how different components were assembled. He had a chat with a lot of the guys on the shop floor. I also remember, he was smiling, laughing, very engaging man. It was just a wonderful experience.
And were you surprised at all that he was interested in the nuts and bolts, let's put it that way?
Yes, I was. Yeah. And at one point, each station, fit various components, and he actually commented on the fact that the way that the caravans are assembled are very similar to the way that they build boats.
But what stays with Simon about that day was not just the Duke's intellectual curiosity, but his tenderness.
It was obviously the day job for them, and they do it a lot, but they were so good at putting people at their ease, being engaging with them, and everyone sort of felt, having met them, that they were special in some way. Probably my favourite or my fondest memory of the day, it was quite cold, and I remember when the Queen and Prince Philip were leaving, Prince Philip got into the car and he picked the blanket up off the seat and he put it across the Queen's knees to keep her warm, which I thought was lovely, and it sort of reminded me above all else that they're a very loving married couple.
And for Steve, it was his rapier-like sense of humour that was unforgettable.
When they were both leaving, the Queen and the Duke, I was up by the top opening the front door for them to let them out, obviously, and there was a bit of rubbish on the floor, so I quickly picked it up, not realising my gold chains fell out the top. When he looked at me twice, gave me a big smile, I said, "Don't you believe in banks, sir?" I totally shocked as he spoke, and I said, "No, sir, I don't. No, sir, I don't." But it was a real honour to meet him and to speak to him. Amazing.
As sharp as a tack and aged in his early 90s. The Queen's representative in Bristol, the Lord Lieutenant, has more fond memories of jokes about gold chains.
I can remember when he came to Bristol, and the Lord Mayor at the time was Colin Smith, and he and I were waiting to receive His Royal Highness, and he came into the back, and of course Colin had all the chains on, and the Duke of Edinburgh went up to it and he went, "Thump, thump, thump. Is that real gold?" So I can imagine, as a grandfather, he really delighted his grandchildren. He could get up to the best devilment.
Those who met Prince Philip speak of a burning desire to discover more about engineering, art, the environment, but also people's lives.
It's really lovely to see you. How are you? You okay?
Michaela tells me she met him while raising awareness of disability issues.
Because I'm also deaf, in events where there's a crowded room, I bring my chair up a little bit higher, which allows me to be at eye level with people and it allows me to lift with them. And he walked over to us and he looked at me, "Wow, look at your wheelchair. That's really cool. I love how high you are." And it gave us a lovely opportunity to talk about how much technology has advanced and allowed us to be equal people and equal citizens.
In 1957, he saw the abandoned ship, the SS Great Britain, as he piloted a seaplane over the Falkland Islands. And 12 years later, they would be reunited.
The mission to bring the SS Great Britain back to the UK from the Falkland Islands was an incredible story, fraught with risk and adventure, just the type of thing the Duke of Edinburgh was interested in. And in fact, on the day that it returned to this dock here in Bristol, the one where it was built, he was on board to witness its return.
he became the very first patron of the ship's trust.
What do you think? Don't ask me.
And that love of the sea and aviation combined perfectly at the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset.
He was Royal Marines, so he was a Captain General and always was a keen supporter of all things Royal Navy, but in particular naval heritage and all of the museums which now form part of the National Museum of the Royal Navy.
Before stepping back from public life 4 years ago, the Duke of Edinburgh took part in hundreds of tours and engagements each year, part of his everyday, which for those who met him created an unforgettable day.
You know, I think we probably could have made that film in any town or city, not only in Great Britain, but indeed around the Commonwealth. Let's now find out a little bit more about the Duke's military career, his naval career, with Nick Hewitt from the National Museum of the Royal Navy. Good morning. A lot of talk about how far could he have gone in the service if he'd remained, obviously, if the Queen hadn't acceded to the throne. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's really interesting, isn't it? He was a proper fighting naval officer. You know, he did well in wartime, and who knows, officers like that, sometimes they can have a stellar trajectory after the war, sometimes they thrive in wartime and they're maybe just a little bit too punchy and a little bit too inclined to speak their mind to progress further. It becomes very political, that job, after a point, so who knows. But he certainly thrived. He was a very good fighting naval officer, no question about it.
A very young first officer, I think.
Yeah, supposedly, although that's not been verified that he was the youngest first lieutenant in the Royal Navy. That would actually be quite hard to verify. But he was very young, they all were. You know, he was 19 when he first saw action. So, you know, this is incredibly young. It's hard to imagine, really, isn't it?
Yeah. A distinguished career, mentioned in dispatches.
Yeah, so he starts the war actually in the Indian Ocean, but then he transfers to HMS Valiant, a battleship in the Mediterranean Fleet at the start of 1941, and that is the most active period. That year is a terrible year for the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean. Actually, the Mediterranean Fleet is outgunned. They've been relying. The whole strategy has been relying on having the French alongside them in the Mediterranean. France obviously falls in for 1940, so the fairly small Mediterranean Fleet is trying to take on the entire Italian Navy, and Prince Philip is there for all of it on Valiant. He first sees action in a bombardment of Bardia, Italian occupied town on the North African coast, and then there's this action at Cape Matapan, one of the last great fleet actions in European waters, actually, that nobody's ever heard of. When Admiral Cunningham, the really gifted commander-in-chief of the Med Fleet, some call him the greatest admiral since Nelson, actually. He ambushes the Italian fleet at night off Cape Matapan, which is on the southern tip of Greece. And there's this dreadful night action, actually, when they catch 3 Italian cruisers and 2 destroyers in the dark and turn the guns of 3 battleships on them, sink them all. The loss of life on the Italian side is horrific. The Royal Navy loses 3 sailors. There's something like 2,500 Italian dead. So, yeah, extraordinary thing to be part of. Prince Philip's role as a very young midshipman is he's in charge of one of the searchlight batteries on the side of the bridge. So he's there for this high drama when they pick up the Italians on radar, and then they suddenly switch on all these searchlights and illuminate these Italian ships right under their guns. So very dramatic introduction to naval warfare for him.
And also essential work perhaps doesn't make the history books, apart from one of the ones I know that you've written, but in the convoys, in escorting essential supplies, particularly coal, to fire the war efforts.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a subject very close to my own heart, as you say. So after Valiant, he comes back to the UK, he does some courses, and then he gets posted to HMS Wallace, which is an old destroyer built at the end of the First World War. And she is escorting coastal convoys around the UK. So everybody's heard of the convoy systems across the Atlantic, into the Arctic. This system starts at the start of the war and it goes on right to the end, and they are ferrying really important, vital but very mundane cargoes. To really simplify it, all the coal is in the north of England, and the power stations and the domestic heating is in the south, and it has to be moved there. Britain has always moved this stuff by sea, and they can't stop moving it by sea just because there's a war on. So HMS Wallace spends on and off the best part of 2 years going up and down the east coast, escorting these dirty little colliers like Macefield's poem, full of coal, cement, other kind of high volume, low value cargoes. And it's really, really dangerous. There isn't an epic battle, but there is a constant threat from German mines. The Germans are coming over by ship and by air and dropping mines. E-boats, which are kind of German fast motor torpedo boats, come out from Holland, launch an attack and go back again. And there's air attack as well. So constant threat.
All right, Nick, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating to hear some of those stories from you this morning. Thank you for your time. Yes, Prince Philip, obviously a character that many of us thought we knew, perhaps we're discovering over the last 24 hours or so, and indeed in the days to come, that there were far more strings to his bow than perhaps we had all even imagined or understood. Back to you two.
John, thank you very much.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Breakfast is back tomorrow. I'll be here from 6 o'clock.
BBC News coverage of the death of Prince Philip will continue here on BBC One. It's worth telling you that regular programming carries on BBC Two.
But before we go, we'll just take one more look back on the remarkable life of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. From all of us